This bright, sunny day was just overflowing with this sad dude's pain. He was bawling, totally unable to believe his beloved little sister wasn't real. The guy just dropped to his knees, pounding drinks like he refused to accept it. He was broadcasting his pain for all to see, not even noticing the girl next to him. Sitting in front of him was Phoenix Exer, the second prince of the Exer dukedom and the empire's top knight. He had a damn good reason to be out on the lawn, drunk and sobbing his eyes out. He'd just found out the youngest daughter of the Exer family was a fake, a total fraud. The girl wasn't expecting him to be so out there, so completely unhinged. She knew she had to try and calm him down, suggest he take a breather. She kept saying he could at least try to do something if he took care of himself. The girl told him to take care of himself and that she had to get out of here. She knew it was only a matter of time before he found the real Duchess's daughter. She felt awkward, seeing as how she was the one who blew the whistle on the fake sister. Even so, she kept her mouth shut about being the real deal. The Exer dukedom was the top noble family in the Eastern Empire. Everyone thought this family was perfect, but she was hiding a secret. Not many people knew the duke's youngest daughter had been kicked to the curb. Her background was the reason, but they eventually reversed that decision. After searching for ages, everyone figured she was dead until she showed up at the palace. The family members immediately apologized and welcomed her back with open arms. Ever since then, she's been a total spendthrift and a real jerk to anyone who's nice to her. People were always gossiping about her looks and personality, and they were green with envy. It wasn't until later that everyone found out this woman was a complete fraud. The real long-lost daughter of the Exer family was the one who exposed the whole scam. Perian was a spy for the Holy Kingdom of Roque, and she stirred up a lot of drama. After that whole banishment thing, her life went straight to hell. The Empress of the Holy Country took her in when Perian was practically on her deathbed. Perian did everything she could as a spy to pay back the favor. One day, the Empress mentioned there was an imposter running around in the Exer Duchy. She ordered Perian to infiltrate the duchy and figure out who she was. The whole point was to make sure that marriage between her and the Western Empire never happened. Peri agreed to take on the job without a second thought. She used to dream of reuniting with her family, but now it felt foreign to her. Right now, she was looking at her second brother and wondering if family ties even mattered to him. She figured this was the last day she'd have to put up with this whole charade. She'd finished the job, and all that was left was to head back home. Perian walked back into the main hall and was surprised by all the commotion. She saw the maids were all huddled together, buzzing about something. Her eyes went wide when she saw blood dripping from someone's hand. She looked up and realized it was that guy's hand. That was Lyrian Exer, the eldest son, the next in line to inherit the dukedom. He was eating calmly. Then he grabbed a whiskey bottle and smashed it with his bare hands. Looks like he was also floored by the sudden news about the fake sister. Periel's gaze accidentally met Lyrian's boozy stare. It seemed to her like the tipsy guy was giving her a weird once-over. She walked away, realizing that this wasn't something she should be concerned with anymore. She had a bad feeling, which made her want to get out of there ASAP. She stopped when she realized someone was quietly tailing her. Perian cursed under her breath and asked why they were approaching her. Turns out, Mr. Lyrian Esther himself wanted to have a word with her. Perian felt uneasy under his creepy stare. He turned and said he had a special offer just for her. The guy faced her and said it wasn't just an offer, but a request. She was shocked he didn't recognize his own sister, even up close. She'd heard the saying that your gut always knows the answer. She held on to hope, riding home in the carriage after 15 years. The abandoned girl gazed thoughtfully at the passing scenery. Deep down, she still hoped her family would recognize her right away. But as it turned out, her foolish hopes were just a pipe dream. To her surprise, Lyrian asked her to stay and be their comfort. That sounded so insane, she couldn't believe it. He just casually dropped that they needed someone to replace the old faker. He said they needed someone to impersonate their dead sister. Lyrian wanted her face, which resembled their sister's, to be a comfort to them. Perian thought he'd totally lost it, needing a doll like that. Her perfectly crafted persona didn't raise any flags, but she was still blown away. She didn't get why the Phoenix brothers and Lyrian had gone off the deep end. She was disgusted by how they were trying to make amends after ditching her. She said she wasn't about to comfort them, pretending to be the Duke's dead daughter. The girl added that they definitely didn't need her for that role. She wouldn't let anyone run her life and told them they needed a shrink. About 26 years back, their family got a third kid. They were over the moon, finally having a daughter in the family. Everyone was speechless when they saw her hair was a different color. The Duchy of Exeter inherited dragon blood and were highly respected. They had spiritual power, wielding it like a sword from day one. On top of that, they were known for hair as black as the night sky. Every descendant had that color, except for the newborn girl. It only pointed to one thing. The Duchess had been stepping out. All the nobles were buzzing about it, and it got to the Duke big time. He stood up in front of everyone and declared, "This child is my daughter!" Even after a kid like that showed up, he still trusted his wife completely. The guy was blind, believing that even her not being able to use spirit power didn't make her an outsider. He adored his wife and daughter, which shut everyone else up. Because of that, Perian was raised like a little empress. One day, she was traveling with her mother to her hometown, but they were attacked on the road. The Eastern and Western empires joined forces to find the truth, but it was all for nothing. The assassins took out the Duchess and dozens of servants, but Perian survived. She didn't have a scratch on her, which meant her mother had protected her. She missed her mom like crazy and had no idea what her father, the Duke, was really feeling. All the servants were in a total panic and couldn't look after her. She was just a lonely 3-year-old, playing with dirt out in the garden. That's when she first realized she had the power to control the earth. After that, they kicked her out, since the Exeter bloodline couldn't use magic. She didn't know any better and made a doll that looked like her mother to show the Duke. The Duke and her maybe biological father were together at that moment. That's how the secret he'd been hiding for so long came out. On top of that, they put her in the care of a guy who turned out to be a real piece of work. So, she ended up living in a tower used for monster research. All she ever felt in that place was loneliness and a whole lot of pain. She figured Dad was pissed and locked her up because of the messed up doll. Perian decided to make it even better, so he'd definitely love it. With that in mind, she kept cranking out more and more figures of her family. One day, someone showed up where she was locked away, yelling their head off. She saw some feet and thought her dad and brothers had finally come for her. But instead, it was Queen Maman Roquier who came to her. Seeing her, Perian started shaking and begged her to help. The woman knelt down and promised to take this poor creature away. Perian still remembered that moment, sobbing in her arms. She felt the warmth of her savior for the first time and decided to live for her. That's exactly why she was ready to do anything for the Holy Kingdom of Roque. The mission seemed impossible, but she was willing to take the plunge. Their kingdom was squeezed between the Eastern and Western empires. Perian was facing the question of how to infiltrate the duchy. She decided to think about it after she got into the Eastern Empire. The girl just wanted to eat, but something weird threw her off. She dropped her sandwich on the floor and realized it tasted off. No sooner did she suspect poison than her body crashed onto the tiles. Turns out, some unknown people had slipped her a Mickey. They hurried to cover her eyes before the effect wore off. Little did those goons know, Perian was totally faking it. Her body could filter anything she took in, even poisons. She decided to play along, figure out who these guys really were later. To her surprise, the dude called her Lady and offered to take off her blindfold. She squinted in the light, pulled the blindfold off to see her kidnapper. Talk about a shock. It was someone she knew. She was so stunned, she couldn't even say a word. Sitting right there was Riso Exer, the former duke, her own dad. She used to dream of seeing him, but everything was different now. Even though he gave up his title, he still had serious pull in the whole empire. She still couldn't figure out why he'd decided to kidnap her. Perian wondered if he also wanted to stop the fake daughter's wedding. He introduced himself and swore he didn't want to hurt her. Period pretended to be surprised and asked why someone like him needed her. He said he wanted to offer her a special job. She was about to refuse, but he mentioned her age and where she was from. Riso Exer rattled off all the basic info everyone knew about her. Then, out of nowhere, he offered her the job of personal maid to his daughter. She found it amusing that he wanted to get his daughter a good servant. She asked him straight up why she was being offered such a prestigious position. Riso closed his eyes and said there were plenty of reasons for it. He knew that choosing a handmaiden would have a major political impact. That position could empower her family and stir up a whole lot of gossip. She was the best candidate because she was an orphan from the Holy Kingdom. He asked if she knew about the custom of being a shadow double. It was an old tradition of swapping someone with a look-alike. It helped prevent harm from assassins or rebels. The girl started to object, but he stopped her and told her not to worry. He said he had an artifact that could change the user's appearance. She figured logically that he didn't necessarily need to pick her. He mentioned that for his magic to work, the caster and the target have to be similar. Hearing that, Perian couldn't help but feel let down by the artifact's power. Riso started hyping it up, saying its effect lasts for a couple of months. He wrapped it up by saying that with her looks, activating the artifact would be a piece of cake. This whole scheme seemed fishy to her, but she couldn't back out now. She thought she'd just be a simple maid, but now she might become a double too. This veiled suggestion hinted that things could go south real fast. He picked her because she doesn't have any family who'd make a fuss. Reiso saw people as tools, even though he was giving her a shot at being in the duchy. She smirked at the thought that he was putting the real daughter at risk to protect the fake one. She pitied the girl she used to be, the one who actually looked forward to seeing her dad. It sucked that he didn't even recognize her, and then made that disgusting offer. Still, Perian knew she didn't exactly have a ton of options here. She was being sized up by a predator, planning his next moves to get what he wanted. He said forcing someone into something like this just wouldn't be productive. The guy snapped his fingers, signaling a servant to bring him a cup of tea. He said if she refused, their little chat would be over as soon as they finished their tea. Perian was taken aback, wondering if he'd slipped something nasty in there. He said she'd lose the last 5 hours of memory before drinking it, tops. Reso gave a gentle smile and said it was all to protect a secret. Perian knew damn well there was no such thing as free choice here. She was so bummed out by the whole thing, she'd almost rather just be done with it. She couldn't help but wonder why he went about things this way. The thought crossed her mind that he'd double down and ask her again. She could bail any time, but she didn't want to blow this opportunity. Perian acted surprised again and guessed that he must really love his daughter. He gave her a stone-cold look and said he'd go to the ends of the earth for that kid. Reso promised he'd make it worth her while if she took the job. He paused for a second and asked her what her decision was. Just a few days later, she was getting ready to head out to the duchy. Her buddy was grilling her, wanting all the deets about their chat. She confessed she'd agreed, even though the vibe was totally off. The guy sighed, totally beat, and said he had no clue what she was even thinking. Perian snapped, asking him what the heck he was even doing there. Mello crossed his arms when she brought up her mission from Her Majesty. Mello Roque was the only heir, and she'd known him since they were kids. After all these years, he was closer to her than her own brothers. He genuinely cared about her feelings and what was going to happen to her. The girl smiled and asked if he was actually worried about her. Things were rough at first, because he was totally against her being in the kingdom. She met him 14 years ago and immediately ran into his bad side. Even back then, they were in a situation where staying in charge was a real challenge. He was convinced her being around would be just the thing to kick off a war. He was 11 when he was arguing fiercely with the girl. He demanded she act so quietly, like she was already gone. The girl got scared and asked if there'd be trouble if anyone found out she was alive. Mello said their kingdom's whole deal could be at risk because of her. He kept saying, like he was tired of it, that she needed to lay low and stay out of sight. The kid was surprised when he saw her shaking from fear and hopelessness. He ran right over to her when he realized she was struggling to breathe. So, the girl finally passed out and ended up in bed. She barely managed to open her eyes when she heard a familiar voice. The girl realized Momon was scolding her son for acting up. Mello hung his head, looking guilty, and apologized to her. Momon was bummed out by her little boy's behavior. She turned around and saw that the girl was finally awake. Perian struggled to sit up and said she was awake. She looked away, feeling guilty, and tried to work up the nerve to ask something. The girl sadly asked her why she'd taken her in. She repeated Mello's words about how she couldn't stay in that country. She burst into tears, saying she should just be sent back to that tower. Momon sighed, exhausted, and hurried to comfort the little girl. She said Mello was right, that she had to live under a fake identity. The woman smiled warmly and said that, even so, her life wasn't a lie. She stroked her hands and compared it to working to protect her country. Perian felt a glimmer of hope and asked if there was anything she could do to help. Momon smirked, like the girl's words amused her. She asked if she seemed like the kind of person who'd bring her along just for help. The woman said she only took her because she couldn't stand to see the abuse. She added that saving her was her choice and didn't depend on Perian herself. The kid was thrown for a loop when she was told to get strong and not sweat the small stuff. The next day, Mello decided to personally apologize for the things he said yesterday. Despite his promises, Perian grilled him about the people secretly protecting the country. Mello was surprised that a little girl was interested in something like that. He listened to her story and figured her mom was talking about the intelligence agency. That day, Perian learned about spies for the first time. Right then and there, she decided she'd become a spy for Momon's sake. She kept saying she didn't feel anything for Esther anymore and that she'd complete the mission. Mello knew how she felt, but he still didn't want to let her go. Her behavior, screaming that Exer meant nothing to her, made him uneasy. She was trying to act like she was over the past, but her feelings could betray her any second. He knew it was pointless to pretend he wasn't even a little nervous. Mello figured something inside her had to be screaming. He kept telling himself his mom had already considered this possibility. After a lot of hesitation, he finally decided to give the girl some words of encouragement. He ordered her to return in 6 months, after thoroughly embarrassing their family. The guy told her to tear them apart, just like in her favorite childhood plays. Perry could see he was trying to hide his anxiety behind a joke. He believed in her so much. Failure wasn't even an option in his mind. The girl confidently declared herself the kingdom's best spy and demanded he believe it. She smirked, already looking forward to the road ahead. Perian vowed in her mind to completely trash that fake's daughter's reputation. She was dying to prove to her father that this servant he brought in would be his biggest mistake. This whole thing felt like a curveball, but she was betting on success. A few days later, she was already crossing the border into the Eastern Empire. She was stoked to be arriving at the Exer Duchy soon. That bonehead Mello's stupid order was still bugging her. Perian was so confident because of her earth magic. She was constantly leveling up her skills just to survive in this dump. She could go days without food, pulling nutrients from murky water and dirt. On top of that, she could create a doll that looked just like a person. At some point, they gained color and even started to move around. She was able to sculpt a person exactly as it was written in the holy texts. Even so, she still didn't think of herself as someone special. Besides that, she sent the clay figures down to see the world. Because of this, she realized her hearing and sight were linked to the dolls. Later, she even learned to transfer herself into a body made of clay. She figured this out when she was really sick, stuck in that dark tower. She could jump into a fake body and send it out into the world. Perian hung out with her clay family members when she was feeling lonely. So yeah, she managed to spend a full 8 years in that tower. Shaking off those useless memories, she glanced out the window. Turns out, her train had finally pulled into its destination. And just like that, she was back in the Exer Duchy. She stared thoughtfully at the building that used to be her home. Perian gripped her satchel as another maid greeted her. The woman announced they'd already prepared for her arrival. Perian was glad to hear that, since she was totally wiped from the trip. Just like the former duke promised, they treated her well and were friendly. Still, people were whispering about her appearance behind her back. The maids gossiped about her like she couldn't even hear them. Little did they know, she'd been eavesdropping through her clay dolls the whole time. She'd secretly planted them everywhere, so she could see everything outside the carriage. The girl figured she'd be hearing this kind of garbage all the time in the future. Finally, they took her to the palace and showed her the waiting room for her future mistress. The girl calmly explained that her mistress would call her if she waited there. She thanked the girl for the escort and studied her face. Perry guessed that this person was Lucian Istelbear. She was the second daughter of a fancy family and was immediately assigned as a maid to the duke's daughter. The girl looked away and said she had something she needed to tell her. She told me to watch myself around Larian Exer. Perry froze, totally shocked to hear that name again. Larian Exer was her older brother, the one she was about to meet. What surprised her was him being with his little sister so late. She got the feeling they were always together at this hour. She decided to stop dwelling on pointless stuff and mentally prepare herself. Over the 4 years of searching, tons of young women showed up at the Esther mansion. Every single one of them claimed to be the Duke's youngest daughter. Perry suspected a fake couldn't pull something like that off alone. It seemed to her like there was some organization helping to scam the duchy. Besides all that, she was convinced this whole setup was way more complicated than it looked. You can imagine her surprise when she was greeted with a sweet smile. She definitely wasn't expecting them to be so chill and friendly. The girl started chatting with Perry like they were old friends, which was totally different from what she expected. She asked Perry to cut her some slack for being a little rough around the edges. Looked like she was playing the part of a street kid who grew up all alone. She smiled and introduced her super caring brother, Larion. Perry felt her breath catch in her throat when her brother smiled. It felt kinda weird seeing him so gently drying the hair of a grown woman in a robe. Usually, that kind of thing would be the job of the maids, not some dude. Still, the maids were keeping their distance and staying out of it. You could tell by the looks on their faces, this was totally normal for them. Perian was shocked by what she was seeing. It reminded her of something else entirely. She couldn't help but see them as lovers, not siblings. She was thrown by their weird dynamic, and the fact that Perry wasn't recognized. She just had to accept it, since even her own dad didn't recognize her. The fake Perry turned away from her brother and asked her what her name was. The girl didn't panic and calmly said that her name was Perry. The fake princess laughed and said that her name was Perry too. She also added that she should probably change her name and started thinking about it. Perry was just daydreaming about how her brown hair matched her name. Out of nowhere, she announces she's going by Brown from now on. Brown was about to launch into her mission, all proud, but got cut off. Perian just smiles and says it's all good, she can head out. Brown's taken aback, like the princess doesn't know she's her decoy. Still, she says she already heard the whole deal from the Duke. She asked her to consider if she might be walking into a real mess here. The princess adds that she's got plenty of tough knights to back her up if things go south. Brown couldn't help but think Perian had already talked this over with her dad. Looks like he's still dead set on this plan because of Perry. No sooner had Brown left the room than the fake princess started trashing her. The maid herself hung back by the door, trying to eavesdrop on their conversation. Perian complained, sounding annoyed, that she looked way too much like her. The reason she was able to fool everyone was because she resembled the Duke's daughter so closely. She had to pay a pretty steep price to become Perian. She snuggled up to her brother, mentally freaking out about losing her spot. The girl turned and looked at him, like she was trying to read his mind. He answered her unspoken question, and even he was surprised their father found someone like that. He added that she was brought in for protection, and she shouldn't be so bummed out. Lyrian stroked her face and suggested they make sure she doesn't get anywhere near her. Perian turned down every option on the table and thanked him for his time. He smiled, patted her head, and said it was just a decoy anyway. She froze, waiting for him to clarify what he meant. He asked if she could still use the magic she had as a kid. Perry said she couldn't use it anymore because of the trauma she went through. He saw the hurt look on her face and apologized for what he'd said. Perian couldn't fake magic she never even knew existed. She was still sure no one would suspect a thing. It seemed like Lyrian believed every single word she said, even now, but she didn't even notice his smiling face turn to sadness. Meanwhile, Brown flopped wearily onto the maid bed. She was still thrown by how carefree the fake princess was acting. She figured Perry ordered her to take it easy as a way to get rid of her. That whole childish act around Lyrian was just her marking her territory. Now Brown was sure she was starting to sweat the similarities. At first, she was thrown off by the phony kindness. But Perry wasn't that simple. Brown was certain she could get the intel no matter what. Everyone around her interacted with the Earth, even if they didn't realize it. Earth could be found anywhere a person lived. Because of that, Brown could influence everything around her and get the info she needed. Getting benched might actually give her more time for the mission. Brown threw her hands up, stoked, and said the best spy was ready to roll. Meanwhile, some dude nobody knows is creeping up on the tower. He touched the wall, lost in thought, like he was trying to feel its vibe. He was right. This tower definitely gives off some seriously bad juju. It felt just as messed up as that fake who showed up at the Duke's place. It's been a year since that phony baloney showed up at the Exeter estate. Seems like things in the duchy have been a little smoother since they found their daughter. But still, ever since then, things at the Exeter duchy have been going sideways. Even the great Reso Exer bounced and became a hermit. This all started right after she called him creepy. Even Larian Exer, who was known for his authority and respect for the rules, changed. He started breaking the rules left and right just to indulge his sister's every whim. The second son, Phoenix Exer, was a distinguished knight with a noble heart. After she showed up, he started hitting the bottle hard and causing trouble, turning into a drunk. All this stuff was so messed up, he just couldn't wrap his head around it. It seemed like all this craziness started after Perry came back. The guy himself was convinced for a long time that the real Perry had died right in front of him. Pandurnian Exer was the first adopted son and the current duke. He was known for being arrogant and having a really short fuse. He was doing a killer job running the duchy for the actual heirs, who were totally out of it. Even though he was blowing Perian off, he still had his hands full. Like nothing was up, The girl just strolled up and said hi to the third brother. She chirped that she was super stoked to be getting all familial with him. To her shock, all he did was tell her she looked like crap. She clearly wasn't expecting anyone to be immune to her little act. The fake put on a sad face and was like, "How could you say that?" From that moment on, Lyrian and Pendernian kicked off their epic showdown. He knew some people might see it as him being a real jerk. When he ran into her, he had no choice but to lay it on her like that. Lady Perian had been a major figure in his life ever since he was taken in. He was adopted because Lady Perian needed a husband. They figured they could bring her back as a bride, since she wasn't blood-related. Back then, he was worn down by the constant competitions and pressure. That year, he decided to approach the tower, like he was in a daze. The Duke of Exeter's daughter was the only one who could save him from that living hell. He felt like if she chose him, his struggles would finally pay off. He entered the tower, clearly not expecting to see her broken body. She was destroyed right before his eyes. What got to him was how the 10-year-old bloodstain looked like it was fresh. He left the cell that had once been hers, and a chill went right through him. Pandurnayan saw the scratches a kid's fingernails had left on the wall. He felt a crushing pain in his chest and dropped to one knee. The guy couldn't help imagining her crying right there. From that day on, every single day was lived with guilt. Even so, he knew she probably wouldn't have been happy with that messed-up family. It felt pointless to guess about anything, since she was already gone. He couldn't save her back then, and became like a puppet without a master. Now, he had no reason to come to this tower and keep torturing himself. He knew it, but he was still obsessed with someone who wasn't alive anymore. Pandarian figured things would be way better if she were still around. It's been 2 weeks since Brown became a doppelganger. She was slowly getting used to the tough life of a maid in the Duke's mansion. Everyone treated her like she was invisible because of what Pandarian said. Even so, she still tried her best to fit in. She took the initiative and wasn't afraid of getting her hands dirty, and people respected that. Because of that, she got treats and could work on her strategy. One of those days, she was doing her usual chores. A group of knights stumbled upon her, gossiping about her. One of them was super confident he could, win her over. He walked up to the girl and greeted her politely. Not knowing she'd heard everything, the dude practically forced his help on her and snatched the heavy bucket out of her hands. In her head, she was already calling him out for helping her with such a two-faced act. He helped her empty the bucket and suggested they chat over a drink. She thanked him for the offer, but said she wasn't comfortable drinking with just anyone. He smirked, a real nasty one, when he caught her subtle hint. He asked if she already thought she was too good for him. The knight showed his true colors after she turned him down. The others laughed and asked if the maid was too good to drink with him. Brown wasn't surprised they were trying to disrespect her like that. Still, being a personal maid was way different than being a regular servant. The knight raised his hand, saying he'd put her in her place with one shot. He was speechless when Sir Phoenix suddenly appeared next to him. Looks like Brown didn't expect him to show up here either. She spun around instantly to get a look at his face. And there he was, looking like death warmed over after a bender. She bit her lip, trying to figure out when he'd managed to sneak up behind her. Not only that, but he'd even managed to mask the heavy booze smell that usually clung to him. The guy stopped next to the maid and ordered everyone else to clear out. Brown heard his voice and figured he was actually sober for once. She felt awkward running into him like this, of all places. She awkwardly thanked him for the help and asked if there was anything else he wanted to say. He stared at her face for a long time, then said, like he was somewhere else, that she looked like his sister. She tried to hide how surprised she was and said she gets that a lot. She asked if he needed something from her, but he just turned away. He casually plopped down on the grass and told her to get back to work. She never imagined he'd fallen this far, ending up like this. That day, for the first time in 20 years, she met her broken brother. To her surprise, after that day, he started following her around everywhere. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but he kept sticking to her like glue. Every day that passed, she knew this was no accident, and they needed to talk. Anyone else would have ignored it, but this was different. Even doing chores, she couldn't forget about the mission. She could pull off her mission thanks to her clay figures. They let her know everything that was going on all over the castle. She also knew all the gossip that everyone else was spreading. Sometimes the figures messed up and showed her ants instead of anything important. Still, earth magic could be detected by people with heightened senses, like Phoenix. She managed to figure out the castle's defenses and the knight's patrol routes. She wanted to ditch Phoenix ASAP. He was messing with her powers. The girl stopped in the middle of the clearing and decided to shake him off. She asked him to sit down next to her so they could talk for a bit. Because of everything, even the way he was sitting next to her was getting on her nerves. She straight up asked him what his deal was, why he was following her. She wanted to know why he couldn't just go hang out with his sister. He tensed up and said he shouldn't go near her, not with things the way they are. After that, he clammed up, and the conversation just died. In the end, their chat was a bust, and he kept tailing her. Out of nowhere, a smiling blonde in uniform almost ran her over. Brown couldn't believe she'd met someone who was actually happy to see her. She chirped happily that Brown really did look like Perry, like an angel. Brown glanced at her rosy eyes again and remembered Elbry. Elbry was a strong fencer and managed to snag the position of Perry's assistant. Usually, maids were taken from noble families within the country, like Lucian. Nevertheless, an exception was made for Elbry because of her abilities. Brown still didn't understand why this girl had sought her out. Elbry told her to use her first name and complimented her skin. She found out that Brown hadn't been assigned any work yet and suggested they hang out. The girl smiled brightly and said she wanted to be friends. Brown decided to play along to figure out what she was really up to. Elbry suggested we head towards her office. Brown was stoked that she turned out to be such a down-to-earth and cool chick. It struck her as weird that others hadn't noticed how much she was into the Duke's daughter. On top of that, she was surprised Elbry had such a hard time getting Perry to like her. Brown found out about it because Elbry got demoted because of Perry. She also spotted some weird signals, but Elbry didn't seem like she was hiding anything. Over time, she became convinced that she just really digs the Duke's daughter. Brown even started hoping she could dig up some new intel. In the dining hall, Elbry learned that the girl often hits up the brewery. The maid was blown away by how she handled such a massive workload. Brown proudly stated she'd taken night training courses at the academy. That bit of info was the only truth in her whole story. She always had to live under a false identity, wearing a different face, just to get the job done. Even so, she did actually study at the academy, thanks to Mello and Moman. They also insisted she use the name Perry, at least while she was there. Elbry lit up and suggested asking Phoenix to teach her swordsmanship. She was surprised Phoenix was following her around every day for no reason. Brown called it a real drag. Before she noticed he was standing right there, she went white as a sheet when she saw him next to the table. After that, he spent forever trying to prove he was only there because of Elbry. She couldn't figure out why he couldn't just stop following her, even if it was just for the sake of his own pride. His blatant stalking was starting to mess with her job even. The brewery owner was always giving her the side-eye whenever Phoenix Xer showed up. It was getting embarrassing how his appearances freaked out the staff. She decided to shoulder the burden herself and asked for a job somewhere deserted. So, they sent her to hang laundry in some remote corner of the garden. She felt much calmer since she couldn't hear people screaming. Out of nowhere, he says Perrion looked like a little cushion from behind. She was stuck listening to all this nonsense and stories from his life. He always went on about how little Perrion was so sweet and kind. Phoenix was talking about the little girl's actions with a kind smile. Sometimes, she'd even take a piece of candy out of her mouth to give to him. Brown was surprised he remembered so much about her childhood. His sad, longing gaze, missing his sister, was getting to her. Still, none of that really mattered to her anymore. She flopped back onto the bed, exhausted after another day at work. Now, all she had to do was figure out how to expose the fake. She could just show off her magic, but she couldn't resort to that. The girl knew they wouldn't let her return to the kingdom peacefully. She had to expose not only the fake, but also the people helping her. The little earth spirits made her work easier, but she needed another way. She knew the Duke's daughter would be in her room right about now. She considered sending the little spirits into her room. To her surprise, she found her in the bathroom, looking totally messed up. A chill ran down Brown's spine when she saw the girl. The fake was sobbing in pain, trying to smear ointment all over her eyeball. She couldn't figure out why Perrion was bleeding and touching her eye with her bare hands. Brown realized she was applying something weird from a jar. She instantly figured out the reason she was doing it. You only get those violet eyes when a woman hits it big in magic and pops out a daughter. Looking back, it wasn't surprising she was trying to copy those features. She froze, thinking about how the cream could be used. Brown considered revealing her real eye color to everyone. Besides that, she could find out who exactly was supplying Perrion with the cream. The next day, she was back to listening to Phoenix's stories again. He was like some crazy old grandpa, just lost in his memories all the time. He figured Perry was just a kid who liked the taste of something. Not so great. The girl turned around, tired, and asked if that was the end of the story. She mentally face-palmed and grabbed a fresh towel. Brown turned to Phoenix and asked if he was really that fond of Perion. She asked again why he wouldn't just come to her. He seemed lost in thought, not rushing to answer her question. She sat down on the grass, and then he started talking about his father and brother. He frowned and asked, rhetorically, why they were such terrible people. They rejected her themselves, and now they're acting like they can't live without her. He criticized them for throwing out such a sweet kid and for mistreating her. Phoenix kept repeating that she was just a little kid, like he felt bad. Before, he'd only ever talked about Perry's life. Before, she was kicked out. Phoenix always talked about the child Tao, but not the grown-up sister who came back. Brown guessed he was still stuck in the past, when their family was happy. She figured he'd totally lose it if he found out she was a fake. Phoenix noticed she was spacing out and called out to her. He looked her dead in the eye and asked what her name was. She smiled and said her name was Brown, which just made him even more curious. It seemed like he'd decided to stop treating her like just some stand-in. She was glad he'd stopped following her around, so she decided to say goodbye. She tried to leave, but at the last second, he told her to hold up. Out of nowhere, he asked what she would do if she was Perion. He wanted to know if she could live with it if her own family had turned their backs on her. She froze, because she didn't even know how to answer that. Their conversation got cut short when Helik, commander of the Sapphire Knights, suddenly showed up. Phoenix spotted the guy and casually asked what brought him around. Helik announced that Sir Larian was inviting the two of them to dinner. The offer was so out of left field, it totally caught them off guard. Larian greeted them with a warm smile, thanking them for showing up. He called Felix a rascal, saying he wanted to pay his respects for his patience. Brown didn't get it, since Larian had been giving her the cold shoulder before. Plus, he was missing his little sister, which was already pretty weird. She was surprised to find they were actually getting along better than she thought. Felix had called them awful before, which is why she figured they'd clash. She smiled, thinking to herself that they were family, no matter what. And so, they had dinner together, just like a real family would. Perion was floored when she found out what her brother was up to these days. He specifically asked me to tell you he's having dinner with Phoenix and Brown. The girl teared up, terrified that her little secret could blow up in her face any second. She remembered Felix had been cutting back on the booze and was always trailing after Brown. Perry asked, sounding lost, if she just wasn't good enough for them. She immediately smiled and told them to forget she said anything, like she was trying to calm herself down. Her lady-in-waiting sadly watched how hard this news hit her. Perion turned away, trying to hide the look of pure rage twisting her face. She hated Brown, thinking she was trying to hog all the brothers' attention. Perry grabbed a knife and swore she wouldn't let that happen, not on her watch. It took her forever to calm down, until she heard the maid's voice. The girl tried to pull herself together and focus on the game she was playing. She asked Lucian how her engagement was coming along. She was stoked that Lord Hontaine had reacted positively to the whole thing. The Exer family ruled the Eastern Empire, while the Vendôme family ruled the West. These were two top-tier families, representing each country. Just 6 years ago, things were, let's just say, tense between them. Her marriage was super important, since it could save the countries from war. She dreamed of a peaceful life after getting married. Perry wanted everyone's blessings and respect for the rest of her days. Now she had to get rid of Braun before Hontaine saw her. All that was left was figuring out the best way to take her out of the picture. The thoughts in her head stopped when she felt the side effects of the ointment again. She shook with pain, like someone was clawing at her eyes. The girl cried, wondering why she had to suffer like this. Ever since Braun showed up, things hadn't been going as smoothly as she'd planned. She was jealous of her brothers, who could turn their backs on her at any moment. She was furious that Braun dared to use her face. She looked up at the ceiling and vowed to crush that lowlife. Meanwhile, Phoenix was chilling, chatting with his brother and the maid. He noticed for the first time that Larian was treating the maid like a lady. Phoenix just found out she was handpicked to be Perion's personal attendant. Finally, it clicked for him why they were so similar. The girl knew Phoenix might not be cool with it, which is why they kept it quiet. Phoenix immediately wondered why Perry had separated Brown. He also called out Larian for spoiling Perry way too much. Brown wanted to laugh at how he was trying to act all buddy-buddy. Larian asked why Phoenix was being so chatty with Miss Brown. The guy said being around her just brought him peace. Even he knew how messed up he was acting. Phoenix winced and admitted he was still scared, stiff standing in front of Perry. He couldn't show he cared, because he'd instantly feel guilty about her childhood. That's why he thought he was total garbage and couldn't get close to her. Larian clapped him on the shoulder and said he totally got it. He said all they could do was love her till the end, like brothers. He figured that someday they could bridge that gap between them. Phoenix smiled and agreed he couldn't avoid her forever. Brown squeezed her eyes shut, not believing they were saying this in front of their actual sister. So I guess this is what you'd call a first family dinner with my sister and her brothers. I knew I shouldn't get attached. Not when I'm gonna be splitting from this place soon. Thank God that awkward weird meal is finally over. Time to get down to business. Lifts cloth. Brown found out her inside guy actually managed to snag some of the ointment. This little jar in the bathroom had some seriously bright red stuff inside. She told the mud dude to scoop up a little when everyone cleared out. She picked up the smudged little guy and took a sniff. Her heart skipped a beat when she realized it felt incredibly familiar. She stared at her hands, totally lost, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Still, there was no mistaking that foul, greasy stink for anything else. She freaked when she realized it smelled like monster. Looks like this ointment was made from some kind of monster flesh or blood. This stuff gave a person crazy power, but turned them mean and nasty. Now she was totally convinced there was something seriously shady going on. She also decided to check if this side effect had any consequences. That same night, she found Perry howling in pain, clutching her eyes. She fumbled around for the comm port like she was trying to contact someone. Perry squeezed the orb and ordered all the maids to report immediately. She glared into the distance, demanding they drag Brown here now. Brown realized now the fake couldn't handle pain and was acting on impulse. She decided to play along and really ham it up. Brown put on a pained expression as they tossed her right onto the floor. The maids surrounded her, bowing their heads and saying they'd followed her orders. Brown looked up and asked what she'd been brought here for. She wanted to know what mistake she'd made, but Perry had already raised her hand. The next thing Brown knew, a bright red mark blazed across her face. She was visibly shocked that she'd just straight up hit her without a word. And on top of that, Perry did it right in front of all the other maids. Perry towered over her, like an owner over a piece of trash. She had the nerve to ask how I dared even think about taking her spot. Brown glanced down and saw documents, all her personal info laid bare. Perry called her behavior sus, said she'd been doing some digging. She started listing stuff. Orphan, just a diploma from the academy. Perry called her a stain on society, trying to get with her brothers. She pointed a finger right at Brown and said things went south the second she arrived. Brown started shaking like crazy, begging for forgiveness. Perry got down low and said she was partly to blame too. She gripped the edge of Brown's sweater and said it was time to take action. She stared into her eyes, totally intense, and demanded she come to her every single day. Perry said she'd take charge and keep her in line. Brown broke down and agreed to Perry's demand. Perry stood up and said it was all for Brown's own good, so she better be grateful. She smiled sweetly and concluded that they'd be seeing a lot more of each other from now on. After that, she gathered her crew and left Brown alone. She barely had time to be relieved that the mission was going smoothly before everything went south. She was amused by how Perry tried to spin it as if she cared. What worried Brown was that Elbry had a different look on her face today. It was like she was openly wondering if they should even be friends anymore. She wasn't surprised, since Elbry always liked the Duke's daughter more than her anyway. She was surprised when she heard a soft knock on her door. Before she could even open it, Elbry rushed in and gave her a hug. She used to think they could never be close again. On top of that, she brought Lucian, who had brought medicine. Brown couldn't believe they came to her despite the princess being furious. Once they finished the treatment, Brown asked why they were visiting. Lucian glanced thoughtfully at Elbry, as if searching for an answer in her eyes. She admitted that Perry gets like that about once a month. Brown figured the side effects from the ointment were getting worse, and it's a monthly thing. Lucian really felt for Perry, like she was a lost kid. They clearly didn't realize it wasn't the injuries, but the monster blood ointment. Even so, Lucian understood how rough things must be for Brown herself. She lowered her head to the maid and sincerely apologized. She felt awful that she couldn't tell Perry she was messing up big time. She knew her apology probably wouldn't fix anything, but she had to try. Just like everyone else, Lucian cared for the fiery lady. She asked her to understand, something Brown would be thinking about for a while. It also blew her mind that Lucian would bow to someone like her. This whole thing made her realize they were worried about her. For the first time, she felt how much Perry was loved and looked after by the people around her. All those hopes were ancient history now. She was living a whole different life. All she wanted was to chill out, smile, and spend time with the people she cared about. Brown was true to her mission and wasn't about to judge anyone. That said, she did have a problem with using monster byproducts. It was a messed up crime, using human remains like that. It all started 700 years ago, when monsters showed up in the human world. People fought them for ages and managed to defend their homes. Eventually, they started using the skin, flesh, and blood of the monsters they killed. One day, some blacksmith figured out how to make weapons from monster scraps. But there was a seriously deadly catch to that whole process. They used human bones to process this stuff. The method and results varied depending on the type of monster. The Empire outlawed it after things got a little murdery. Brown figured she was using more than just one ointment. She decided to stir the pot a little, see who was behind the fake stuff. The girl grabbed a dagger and made a small cut on her finger. Her blood could neutralize the side effects. Mello and Moman couldn't figure out how it worked, but it worked great. She decided to try mixing her blood with the Duchess's daughter's ointment. The girl expected that fake stuff to just go haywire after she used it. All she could do now was wait for the big fish to take the bait. It's been a month since Brown set this trap for the fake. The servants were practically tripping over themselves, gossiping about Perry and her fiancé's upcoming wedding. Everyone's buzzing, getting ready for Vendôme's visit. Everyone should be happy about this, but not Brown. She knows the real deal about the Duke's daughter, the one who's been giving her hell. This whole worshipping the fake Perryan vibe, it makes her want to puke. Brown's been hitting up magic treatments to get her face back to normal. The healer's starting to think Perryan's totally lost it. Brown's been coming to her every single day for a month, just like she promised. She was being sarcastic about having to put up with things for the lady's sake. The other woman didn't get why she was keeping such a close eye on her. Juris was a mage from the Western Empire, secretly healing Brown's wounds for a month. Every time, she'd ask Brown how much longer she was going to let this go on. The girl gave a mysterious smile and said it would only be a couple more days. Juris, remembering Reso's return, suggested she think about quitting. Even though she was a bit rough around the edges, Brown was super grateful for her concern. She was secretly bending the Duke's daughter's orders, saying Elbury was worried sick. Brown found it kind of funny that only her friends in her family's house cared about her. Even when they saw what was happening, they looked the other way while she was getting hurt. Phoenix was straight up jealous, because Perryan was calling her over every single day. What really blew her mind was the ex-Duke, holed up in the tower ever since she spoke to him. She couldn't believe she was surrounded by so many people who just didn't give a damn. Little did she know, there was someone else who couldn't stand that phony either. The current Duke seemed like the last glimmer of hope in this whole freaking loony bin. The guy showed up at the castle thanks to some teleportation magic he used. Pandarian ran a tired hand through his hair, like he was about to collapse from a migraine. He looked around, relieved as hell that he was finally back in the castle. He even had to go negotiate with the West because of his fake sister. He decided he'd wait it out again, just so he could take her down later. Pandarian went out on the balcony to clear his head, but found some auburn hair. He immediately wondered what that wretched girl was doing there. The guy wanted to tear her apart for barging in without permission. He called her out for being so brazen, grabbed her arm hard, and made her look him in the eye. Pandarian spun her around roughly and demanded to know what this place was. He started to ask how she dared, but stopped when he saw her face. One look was all it took for him to realize she wasn't a fake. Looks like Brown wasn't expecting to find him in a place like this so late at night either. She looked at him surprised and called him Duke Pandarian. The guy definitely wasn't expecting her to say his name. She tried to shake off her fear and asked why he stopped her. He pulled his hand back instantly, saying he mistook her for someone else. The girl immediately remembered he was the only one who hated Perryan. She definitely wasn't expecting him to be so intense on their first meeting. Pandarian told her she could leave if she had nothing more to say. Brown wasn't about to put up with his arrogant stare and left as quickly as she could. The man immediately figured Reso brought her here to protect his daughter. He'd been told before that Brown was being bullied and ignored every day. He was sure this girl would disappear too once he dealt with the fake. Even so, he still couldn't shake this weird feeling. Meanwhile, Brown was just wrapping her head around this whole messed up situation. He was supposed to be chilling in the Western Empire, but out of nowhere he's back. She sighed, knowing that just added one more weirdo to the list. She had no reason to avoid him, but thinking about the past gave her the creeps. As a kid, she was jealous of him because of his freaking diamond eyes. They always said those eyes could ward off evil and see the truth, since way back when. The rumors went wild after Riso Exer announced the adoption. He claimed the Exer family and the Eastern Empire needed diamond eyes for the future. She only read about the news after she got the boot. She figured she wouldn't have been kicked out if she had eyes like that. Because of that, she buried herself deep, even though she wasn't living in the tower anymore. She wasn't hung up on that stuff now, but she still didn't want to think about it. A lot of people figured Pandorinian could see the truth because of all he accomplished. He proved that back when long voyages were basically impossible. He was the first to discover a whole new continent, even with the monster-infested sea. Pandorinian was a true genius, breaking free from his family's BS. Even though he discovered the continent thanks to his abilities, people were more than happy to believe the legend. She was jealous, because the Holy Kingdom didn't have talents like that. It blew her mind that someone that capable would agree to push a marriage contract. Even though the people of the Eastern Empire praised Parian, it still wasn't enough. Brown was convinced this whole operation was ice-cold calculation. The leaders of the East and West Empires wouldn't be swayed by something like beauty. She figured there had to be some kind of secret deal between them. Meanwhile, the knights in the tents were intensely discussing the latest developments. Even though Pandorinian was a genius, they knew jack about where he came from. These were guys from the Western Empire, freaked out that the war had stopped. Lord Hontine's assistant told him not to sweat it. Despite his worries, this wasn't the kind of thing that would get to the Lord. He told him to make damn sure their schedule stayed on track. Lord Hontine was absolutely certain something like this wouldn't screw him over. He thoughtfully flipped through a whole stack of papers on his desk. The man gazed thoughtfully at the document containing information about Brown. He'd thought it'd be tough to meet her, but now he had his shot. He couldn't help but wonder what made her become a maid in the first place. Lord Hontine knew that Duke Pandorinian would definitely sense something special about her when they met. He was curious to see exactly how the girl would react to the encounter. All the man could do was anticipate how things would change in the future. He saw it all as just a bit of fun, something that wouldn't derail his plans. He looked at the man entering the tent as if he were just another pawn in his game. He was sure this passing fancy would eventually sort itself out. Hontine just smiled coolly and promised he'd get right on it. Now, all he had to do was wait for his plan to come to fruition. Meanwhile, Brown was just as worried about what was coming next for her. She needed to keep tabs on Pandorinian to figure out what they were up to. Those diamond eyes and his uncanny instincts still gave her the creeps. Even so, she managed to slip in a little something. Its performance wasn't exactly top tier, given the miniature size. She zoomed in and spotted a guy sitting across from him. Brown decided to eavesdrop on Pandorinian and Larion's conversation. She was surprised by how normal the vibe was between them. Pandorinian didn't waste a second before coldly demanding they stop this. She couldn't believe her ears when he asked how long he was going to put up with that fake. Brown started to feel her connection to the little earth golem weakening. She stared at the floor, lost in thought, trying to process what he'd just said. Brown couldn't figure out how they'd been able to tell Parian was a phony. She was furious with herself for creating such a weak earth golem. All she could do now was calm down and think about what had happened. Before, Larian had treated Perry with affection, even knowing she wasn't the real deal. She immediately started wondering about the real state of affairs in this castle. She figured the brothers and the Duke already knew Perry's true identity. She analyzed Phoenix's behavior and figured he was clueless. He felt super guilty about Parian and was really beating himself up over it. Brown doubted Riso would have snatched her if he thought Perry was a fake. So, she figured the ex-Duke and Phoenix were both in the dark. She couldn't figure out why nobody told them, especially with the wedding coming up. It blew her mind that Pandorinian would just ignore a risk like that. Brown immediately guessed that Hauntain Vendôme knew the truth about Perry too. So yeah, she was in the worst spot she could possibly be in. Now she realized this whole scheme could be a total disaster for the Holy Kingdom. She decided to expose the fake and what kind of stuff she's been using. Brown wanted Perry to pay the price for messing with monster byproducts. She clenched her fist, determined to make things seriously difficult for them. Meanwhile, Pandorinian brought up that he'd asked them to tell the Duke and Phoenix about this. He stared right through Larian and demanded to know why he'd let it slide. Larian just smirked and said he felt awkward bringing it up. He wished they could have enjoyed Perry's return a little longer. Pandurnian called that BS and asked if he enjoyed playing games with that awful girl. Larian admitted he'd like to keep things going the way they were. He was curious to see how things would play out if Perry hadn't, kicked the bucket. Still, thanks to Larian, they were able to push forward the engagement idea. They were free to do as they pleased, since Paris was the one who requested the meeting with Vendôme. That allowed them to connect without other countries sticking their noses in. All he had to do was hang in there until that wretched girl was gone. Pandurnian loathed her, but he put up with it to see his plan through. The next day, something happened that completely floored Perrion. She went to the bathroom as usual to use her ointment. Too bad for the fake. What she saw in the mirror made her tremble with rage. She was stunned that the ointment didn't work for the first time ever. She scooped another layer onto her finger, thinking it had gone bad. Perrion felt excruciating pain every time she used it. Finally, her eyes turned bloodshot, the color shifting to violet. She collapsed onto the floor, exhausted, but relieved she'd finally done it. Perry immediately started wondering why her ointment had stopped working right. She felt totally screwed over that this happened at such a crucial moment. It felt like the whole world was conspiring to drive her nuts. The second she heard Larian's voice, she bolted out of the bathroom. She threw herself into his arms, telling him how long she'd been waiting. She was hoping he'd start comforting her again with his gentle voice. But against all her expectations, he didn't say a single sweet thing. She looked up and saw he was staring at her like she was something nasty. Perrion looked surprised and asked if she'd done something wrong. The guy just coldly told her it was time to knock it off. Perry immediately started guessing if she'd been acting out of line somehow. She instantly figured Pandurnian had something to do with it. Larian snidely relayed his brother's words. She needed to stop freeloading. The girl froze and asked what exactly he meant by that. He smirked and reminded her he had to follow the Duke's orders. Perry could see he was acting totally different than he usually did with her. Larian gripped her chin, real threatening-like, and told her to cut the waterworks. She shoved him away and said she was just having a really bad day. Larian snarked that the guy she'd been drooling over was showing up today. He backed off from his sister, announcing that Lord Huntain would be arriving soon. Larian dipped, telling her to get ready before he left. Just then, Brown happened to be in the same room as Perry. She was surprised how fast Larian turned cold in front of everyone. Unfortunately for her, Perrion spotted her and yelled for her to come over. She was sobbing with rage, saying it was all Brown's fault. Brown saw her nasty look and knew she was about to catch some heat. Perrion, with a voice like ice, ordered everyone out except Brown. Brown knew right away she was about to be the punching bag again. Perrion was smashing dishes, screaming that it was all her fault. Brown kept apologizing, saying she messed up big time. But every word Brown said just wound Perrion up even tighter. She gritted her teeth, spitting out the same damn question over and over. The fake shoved Brown to the floor, yelling about why her brother was acting like such a jerk. She sobbed, saying everything's gone to hell since she showed up. Perrion just kept blaming the maid for stuff she didn't even do. She covered her face, repeating that things would be different if it wasn't for that broad. Brown could see that the ointment was messing with this girl's head again. Perrion seemed to get an idea and asked if she could really go through with it. Her sudden departure only made the girl more uneasy. Perrion grabbed a knife, looking menacing, and said things would change if Brown went missing. Brown recoiled, realizing she was headed for big trouble. She could enhance her body with magic, but that might raise some eyebrows. Perrion flashed a crazy grin and swung the sharp dagger. Brown figured she was done for. But then a savior burst into the room. Perrion was caught off guard when he grabbed her arm hard and yanked her forward. In one swift move, he slammed her to the floor, making her drop the knife. I don't think even Brown expected things to go down like that. She turned her head and felt Pandurnian's intense gaze. Phoenix heard the crash and bolted into the room where it all went down. He was shocked to find Miss Brown was hurt. His eyes snapped to Perry and the knife in her hand. He couldn't believe his precious sister would stoop so low. Brown was loving how this played out. She could totally milk the victim card. Panduronian dropped to one knee and said he'd take the blame. Phoenix was thrown off that he called her Miss Perry, not Brown. Then, cool as you like, he scooped her up to carry her out of the room. Now Phoenix knew even the name Brown was just another way to mess with her. He knew things were going to be seriously messed up between them after this. Meanwhile, Pandernyan had just carried the girl into the room. He gently laid her down on the bed. The girl blushed and thanked him for his help. She was surprised he knew where her room was without her telling him. She felt super awkward about him carrying her personally. Brown tried to reassure herself that he didn't have any impure intentions. To her surprise, he stroked her head and told her to stay put. He saw the mark from the slap on her face and used some healing magic. Pandernyan touched her so casually, like he was just brushing off some dust. His kindness made her think she might have gotten the wrong idea about him. He said he healed all the visible wounds and asked if she was hurting anywhere else. The next moment, Brown accidentally overheard a loud scream. Turns out, a delegation from the Western Empire finally arrived at the castle. They showed up in huge numbers, along with their leaders and merchants. The palace was so noisy, it was hard to imagine how many there were. The girl knew as well as anyone that they weren't just here for a friendly visit. From this point on, the official exchange with the enemy country begins. She asked Pandernyan why he wasn't going to greet them. He just calmly replied that they'd meet at the formal dinner. The man stated that she also had to be there, as Perian's servant. He was talking about the banquet, celebrating the arrival of those big-shot Western guests. Apparently, it's also a public event for hammering out the marriage negotiations. Peri was stoked about it, saw it as a chance to expose the fake. She was thrown for a loop when Pandernyan said the Duke's daughter would soon be gone. She put two and two together and figured Perian had become a liability. She still felt uneasy that he'd trust her with info like that. Still, she steeled herself and decided to ask him the question burning in her mind. He was about to leave, but froze when she asked why he was being so nice to her. In her head, she started thinking he might actually know who she really is. The girl knew she'd have to go on the offensive, even if it meant taking a huge risk. Pandernyan went red and started rambling about how he feels when he sees her face. She used to think he hated faces that looked like the Duke's daughter. Pandernyan ordered everyone to cut the pointless chatter and get ready for dinner. He calmly walked off, saying he'd see them later. Brown spent ages trying to figure out why he was acting so weird. She even wondered if he could tell she was the real deal, with those diamond eyes of his. In the end, she decided to just roll with it and ignore it. Peri took a hard look at her reflection and realized there was no way she could go out like that. Meanwhile, the fake Duke's daughter was sobbing on the floor of her room. She didn't know what to do about the medicine or her brother's animosity. Her maid was trying to calm her down, saying Roxar would hear about her achievements soon. The maid promised to make it happen if the engagement went smoothly. The fake froze when the woman said she'd let her personally take care of Brown. She smiled and said it was time to get ready for the banquet. Looks like that motivation helped Perian snap out of it. She couldn't stop thinking about getting even. Seems like she stopped thinking about anything but Brown during that time. Meanwhile, the girl was getting ready to expose the fake's true identity. She'd been planning this day since she overheard those two brothers talking. What really got her going was that Hansine wouldn't be the only big shot there. Her train of thought was cut short by a knock at her bedroom door. Elbri, the maid, stood in the doorway holding a box. Looks like she heard about all the commotion, too. Brown greeted her with a warm smile and asked what was in the box. Elbri mentioned again that they were required to be at the banquet. The maid confessed that she brought something that had been prepared for her for a while. Brown was floored when she heard that a dress and jewelry had been prepared for her. Thanks to her little helpers, she knew Peri had been planning some real garbage for her to wear. She figured Elbri must have seen that whole mess and decided to gift her a dress. Brown was genuinely grateful for her pure and heartfelt intentions. Elbri lit up when she saw how stoked the girl was. She opened the box and showed her the dress and shoes she'd picked out. In that fancy getup, Brown looked less like a maid and more like a high society lady. She smiled and asked if the gorgeous outfit looked good on her. Elbri gave the girl a big hug and said she looked amazing. She excitedly offered to touch up her makeup to make her even more stunning. Brown suddenly realized Elbri was way more into this than she was. Knowing this dinner might be their last, she decided to speak her mind. She called the girl over, ready to finally talk about something that had been on her mind for a while. Elbri froze, totally caught off guard when she was asked why she liked the Duke's daughter. Brown smirked, figuring it had something to do with how she felt about her. She wanted an answer, but Elbri was struggling to get anything out. The girl suddenly asked if there was anyone she looked up to. Brown didn't know where she was going with this, but she still said yes. As soon as she thought about it, Momen came to mind. She also remembered how her birth mother, Alice, had protected her. Out of the blue, Elbury declared that Madame Alice was that person for her. Even with all the rumors flying around, Elbury thought she was the most amazing person ever. Brown was taken aback. Since the girl was from another country, she couldn't figure out how Elbury knew about her mother. She stood up for the girl, saying she thought she was a good person too. Lady Alice was a total icon for us female knights because of everything she'd accomplished. Elbury smiled and said that wasn't the only reason she respected her. She confessed she was born in a country that got wrecked in a war. Her homeland was overrun by the enemy, and tons of people starved to death. Back then, Elbury was just a little kid who'd lost her parents. She could have died, but then Alice showed up during that awful time. Lady Alice was one of the legendary swordmasters serving the Emperor's army. That day, Elbury was starving and on the run after stealing some food. But bad luck for her, guards were posted all over the village. She tried to hide in the alley with the stolen bread, but they found her. They were gonna beat her down with their bare hands as punishment. Before the guy could even touch the girl, his hand got messed up. He stared, confused, at the spot where the blood started gushing. The guard instantly let go of the girl and screamed when he saw his hand. The woman walked up to the kid and told him he had a chance to save her. She smiled and told him to be grateful to her for the valuable lesson. This confident woman was none other than the Imperial Swordmaster, Alice Exer. Another guy ran up to her and asked what she was doing. The lord of these lands demanded to know what right she had to cause such a ruckus. The woman just replied that she knew that perfectly well herself. She pierced him with a look and said his lands were a total mess. The guy's jaw dropped, like he had no idea what she was talking about. Alice, dead serious, challenged him to a fight, with the land as the stakes. He tensed up and asked if she was really that confident. The woman smirked and said she'd even give up her position if she lost. He said he couldn't stand for her shenanigans any longer and drew his sword. The top swordsman figured she'd lost her edge after having her second kid. He was ready to fight for her title, not some backwater dump like this. Elbury closed her eyes, not believing all this was happening because of her. The guy thought he'd win, but all he got was a nasty wound. Elbury opened her eyes, wondering if that voice belonged to the Lord. Imagine her shock when she saw the Lord collapsed on the floor. In that moment, she was reminded again that she'd been saved by one hell of an amazing woman. Alice gave him a withering look and said he was a real piece of work. Perian was stunned that her mother actually said that. It surprised her, since her mom was usually the most upstanding person. She'd read reports before about how courageous she was. Still, it was hard to believe Alice would talk like that. Elbury teared up and said that things had gotten a lot easier since then. Thanks to Madame Alice, she even got a name and something to eat. One day, she wanted to repay her and gave her the tastiest yellow berry she could find. The woman turned the berry in her hand and said it looked as sweet as Elbury herself. She said that and immediately scarfed down everything else she'd gathered. The girl only found out later that they usually fed those tart berries to livestock. After that, her name became Yellowberry, but they just called her Elbury for short. Looks like it's the first time Brown's heard stories about her mom in so much detail. She was thankful to God that there were people who remembered Alice with such love. Elbury confessed that she just wanted to be friends with her daughter. She felt a little foolish for letting her imagination run wild. Now she understood her daughter didn't have to turn out exactly like her. The girl lowered her head and said that's exactly why she decided to get close to her. Brown finally realized Elbury's blind loyalty was all because of her mom. Brown smiled, saying she was glad they'd met back then. They decided to touch up their makeup again and then head to the banquet. The girl couldn't wait for the curtain to fall on this whole charade. Her soul was shining at the thought that all the lies would soon be exposed. The Exers used to forbid anyone from entering their special building. Even so, they decided to throw a banquet to welcome some big-shot guests. Brown never thought they'd open this place up for something like this. She found some weird structures leading down from above. They stuck her on the floor below, like a servant. But she still felt the pressure. She turned around when she heard a familiar woman's voice. Juris greeted the girls and noticed Elbury's eyes were all red. The girls saw a red mark on Juris's cheek. From what she said, they figured out Perry had smacked her, hard. The mage smiled and said she was done playing nice with the Duke's daughter. She asked about their future plans and offered to find them work in the Western Empire. Brown replied that she didn't have the cash to stay in the Western Empire. She noticed a strange commotion and saw Hauntain across the hall. Today, he was the center of attention, turning heads everywhere he went. She saw his face and it instantly brought back memories of the academy. That day, she was huddled in a corner of the library, sitting on the floor, just crying her eyes out. There he was again. The same guy who always got on her nerves. Back then, she thought he was so awful, not even his pretty face could save him. Brown immediately looked away when she realized their eyes had met. Juris saw Lord Hontaine and had to admit, he was undeniably good-looking. Still, she just knew this marriage wouldn't be good for Perian. She quickly explained that she was just thinking out loud. Juris looked around and said the banquet hall really was incredible. Brown figured she might know the dark side of Hontaine. She decided not to overthink it and just find a way to get to that top floor. The girl was about to leave when she heard someone's voice behind her. Out of nowhere, she was told that Lord Hontaine was calling her up to the top floor. She should have been thrilled about the invite, but they were academy classmates. The girls immediately started gossiping about how she was called Perian, not Brown. Brown didn't have time to explain, so she just headed on ahead. As soon as she got to the top floor, her suspicions were confirmed. She instantly noticed the atmosphere up there was totally different. Still, Hontaine Vendôme was the only one who really stood out. His suit was silk, the most prized fabric you could get your hands on. On top of that, he had this crazy, almost supernatural ability to put pressure on people. She realized he was still just as good at manipulating people as ever. He must have felt her staring, because he immediately snapped his attention away. Too bad for fake Paria, he instantly switched his focus to Brown. He gave her a warm smile and greeted someone he hadn't seen in ages. He asked how she was doing and said she'd really grown up. Hontaine acted like nothing was wrong, chatting about their time back at the academy. Brown realized this innocent-seeming conversation was just him blowing off Perry. That could only mean one thing: he knew she was a phony. So this engagement was just a way to tie two families together. He surprisingly noticed that Perian might be making things tough for her. Brown couldn't believe he knew she was going through some rough stuff. He smiled, remembering she's not exactly a fan of being the center of attention. She awkwardly said it was an honor to be compared to the Duke's daughter. Brown figured all his actions were just his way of trying to get under her skin. He noticed the looks they were getting and suggested they move somewhere else. He wanted to take her to a private room, but Perry stopped him. She smiled and said this girl shouldn't be spending time with him. Perry declared she's just a maid and has no business being here. Perian blew up, saying she'd been holding out on us, not mentioning she knew him. Brown just had to point out how easily she gets worked up. Hontaine smirked and said she was getting the wrong idea. He claimed it wasn't Brown who looked like her, but the other way around. Hontaine patted Brown on the head and guessed she had no idea about her little crush. Before leaving, he dropped that hanging out with Brown wasn't beneath him. The guy hurried off, but she stopped him, asking about when they studied together. She grilled him about how he could be so nice to her. Perry chimed in, saying Brown almost got kicked out of the academy for roughing someone up. She tried to scare him, saying his rep would tank if he was seen with trash like her. Perry was so stoked when he said he knew about the whole thing. He told her to shut her mouth and claimed she did it to protect him. Then, he grabbed Brown's hand and just walked off with her, right in front of everyone. Perry got so freaking mad her hands started shaking. She hated Brown for trying to steal not just her brothers, but Hontaine too. Meanwhile, the girl was thanking Hontaine for his help. She remembered that the incident at the academy happened for completely different reasons. Hontaine smirked and said he didn't even know why he lied. Out of nowhere, he asked her if she knew Pendernian was adopted. Brown was totally shocked and said she had no idea about that. He got up and said she should ask the Duke about it later. He left the room dreamily, saying he'd definitely give her an answer. Brown had been curious about the reason before, but never managed to find out anything. She doubted Pendernian would tell a regular maid something like that. The girl ran after Hontaine to find out why he'd said that. Before she could even take a step, Perian slammed into her. Brown immediately got scared and thought about how long she'd been there. Perian furiously demanded to know if Brown had been messing around with Hontaine. She kept asking how she'd charmed him, like she was totally losing it. Perian didn't even notice that Brown was hurting. The girl screamed, saying they really didn't have anything going on. Perry squeezed her hand even tighter and asked why he was treating her like this. Brown knew she was going all the way, which meant only one thing. She signaled to the maid and decided it was time to put her plan into action. One of the maids offered her a glass of cold water to calm down. Perian yelled at the girl and nearly snatched the glass from her hands. She gulped down the liquid, not knowing it would be the end of her. These maids were agents from her kingdom's intelligence division. The glass contained bronze saliva, capable of neutralizing the side effect. She figured that over all this time, the Duke's daughter had become half a monster. Braun planned for the girl's true identity to be revealed right at the banquet. Spirit beasts, who can sense monsters, were also present. They were supposed to attack Perienne the instant she turned into a monster. The guards craned their necks in surprise, spotting the beasts. They couldn't figure out why they were rising into the sky above Perienne. The other guards immediately started evacuating the nobles from the building. Felix rushed over to them to find out what the heck was going on. Even Resso went pale with surprise when he saw what was happening. They froze when they saw the spirit beast fly towards Perienne. It was heading straight for the girl, who was already losing it. Felix knew he couldn't stop the bird, so he just called out to it. Little did they know, they were about to witness their daughter's downfall. Braun noticed the commotion and decided it was time to kick her plan into high gear. Her job was to look like she was protecting the Duke's daughter, right in front of everyone. Pandurnian yelled out when he saw she was in danger of getting hurt. The next thing you know, the whole ballroom was covered in blood. She was counting on her blood getting on the Duke's daughter's face. That would be the trigger, speeding up her transformation into a monster. Now everyone would know she'd been using monster byproducts. She screamed like a banshee, like her body was being torn apart from the inside. Braun was stoked with how things played out, made it way easier to get back to the kingdom. One of the guards blurted out that Perienne had used some kind of byproduct. The public's gonna think the Exer family got played by a total fake. She was cool with it if this was the end of her mission. The real Peri was caught off guard when she saw Pandurnian's desperate look. She never even got the chance to ask him about what she'd overheard Hontaine say. Meanwhile, the fake kept shrieking and wrecking everything in sight. Pandurnian kept shaking Peri, trying to snap her out of it. Peri caught a glimpse of one of the Exer family members staring blankly into space. Resso couldn't wrap his head around why all this was happening to his daughter. His duchy was the highest ranking in the entire Eastern Empire. Born into that, Resso grew up wanting for nothing, having it all. He was sure his life would be perfect, but what happened 26 years ago broke him. That day, even the maids felt guilty about what they hadn't done. They fearfully presented him with his newborn daughter, who was different. He felt disgust and fear when he saw the color of his child's hair. Someone of the Exer bloodline could never be born with brown hair. Still, Alice calmly showed him the girl, calling her cute. He looked at her happy face and realized she'd had a child with someone else. The man coldly pointed out the child's hair color, demanding to hear the truth. He wanted her to beg for forgiveness, to grovel for screwing up. But to his surprise, Alice just asked what was wrong with it. Her brazen question made something inside him turn ice cold. He couldn't fathom how she could even hold something so unpleasant. The guy awkwardly picked up the kid he hated and heard they looked alike. He bit his lip, trying to figure out if she even grasped how serious this was. Resso knew damn well everyone around them would be whispering about her scandalous behavior. He was afraid this would forever stain the reputations of Larian and Phoenix. The guy considered getting rid of the kid before it was too late. His wife was a free spirit and didn't give a damn about being a duchess. After thinking it over, he decided he'd take this kid under his wing. He saw how stoked his sons were and wanted to shield Peri from any crap. The guy was silent, lost in thought, like he was waiting to see his wife's reaction. He loved her so much, he was willing to play dumb about her secrets. Resso faked a smile and promised he'd keep an eye on her. Alice smiled, surprised, since taking care of a little kid was no walk in the park. Still, he was ready to handle it for the girl and for his wife. He wanted Alice to see the sacrifices he was making to raise Peri. Resso went overboard spoiling the kid who wasn't even his, all for his wife's reputation. He told himself he didn't love Peri, but his heart was a tangled mess of feelings. The guy kept trying to tell himself he didn't love her, but he was kidding himself. Every time he heard her say she loved him, he reached out for her. He was doomed the second he decided to raise Peri. After that, people who had a problem with her hair color slowly started disappearing from the mansion. At first, her birth felt like a disaster, but they had some good times together. For a while there, it seemed like all their problems just vanished into thin air. But this invisible crack just kept getting bigger and bigger. He expected her to inherit his fencing talent, but she turned out to be a dud. His heart just froze over with disappointment when he saw how careless she was. From that moment on, he never forgot that Perienne wasn't his blood. He kept his hatred bottled up until he heard the news. Turns out, the entire escort, including the Duchess, bought the farm on the road. She died fighting, bravely defending her little girl. The Alice he knew would never go down like that. That's when it hit him. His free-spirited Alice sacrificed herself for her kid. After that, the whole world knew about the half-blood daughter. The news even brought out a guy claiming to be Perian's real father. So, the Exardukedom handed her over to the tower until she comes of age. What people didn't know was that the tower was a serious operation. It was built for monster research and was stacked with gear. The lower levels were decked out, which made the Duke seem surprisingly considerate. He ordered her to ask his permission to go outside after her confinement ended. He was in such a bad place, he couldn't bear to keep the kid around. He figured watching her grow up might somehow change things. His hopes were completely crushed when he realized she was a fake. What he saw made him want to hurl. After it was all over, he ordered Perian to be healed. Her goal was to be presumed dead. She jumped when she heard a man's voice coming from the corner. Sitting there was a wary and heartbroken Reso Exer. She froze, trying to figure out what the ex-duke was doing here. Peri tried to start a conversation, but he brought up her heroic act. She feigned surprise and asked if the lady was all right. He tried to steady his trembling voice and said she hadn't saved Perian, but a monster. He said, bitterness in his voice, that he'd been blinded by a fake all this time. He never considered that she could turn out to be a real piece of work. He was truly blinded by what he thought was his daughter. Reso froze up again when Perian tried to speak. She saw his detached expression and asked if he was okay. Peri asked him to explain what happened, but he covered his face. He said the monster was impersonating Perian, and they managed to lock it up. He added that she fell into a coma, and then he recalled the details of their first deal. This time, she gave it her all and proved where her loyalties lie. He flat out asked her what exactly she wanted in return. Peri didn't even know, since all she wanted was to stop the conspiracy. Still, she knew Pandurnian and Huntain could find another way to make it happen. She knew she couldn't stop them, so she decided to take a gamble. The girl looked down thoughtfully and said she had one request. She asked him to stop Lord Huntain and Pandurnian from scheming together. The girl also tried to get some terms that would protect the Holy Kingdom. She said she couldn't stand to see her kingdom go through hell. Peri added that she'd been thinking about it ever since he offered to become a servant. Unfortunately for her, that made-up excuse didn't fly with him. He called it a tough ask, but he still wanted to keep his promise. She was completely blown away when he declared that's exactly what they'd do. She couldn't believe he was actually willing to obediently fulfill her ridiculous request. Peri thanked him, knowing this would help the Holy Kingdom. Reso Exer started to leave, but stopped halfway to the door. He suddenly announced that Hunting isn't who he appears to be. He told her to watch out for guys who whisper sweet nothings. Reso added he was saying this as a father who has a daughter. Peri decided to ask about how his daughter had a different hair color and wasn't an Exer by blood. She straight up asked why he was still looking for her. The girl apologized and guessed she was probably long dead. After a short silence, he said painfully that she was his daughter. He said he was sure about her, because he hadn't personally seen his own child's body. Peri thought to herself that this was total garbage. She felt disgusted that he couldn't even recognize his own daughter right in front of him. Peri learned the truth about her origins 2 years after escaping. That day, she was teasing another Mellow like usual. So, somehow, she pushed all her abilities way past the limit. Mellow saw how pale she was and freaked out, reminding her he told her to take it easy. He noticed her brown hair instantly turned jet black. She saw that coal-black hair, and it instantly reminded her of her mom. Alice had always protected her. Through thick and thin, never stopped loving her. Even so, Peri held a grudge, not understanding why she'd even been born. It made her realize she wasn't some kind of, well, let's just say her mom wasn't unfaithful. That trait showed up every time she maxed out her powers. As soon as her energy came back, her hair color changed back too. Perian figured she could find out the reason from her other mother. Still, she didn't want to look like she was crawling back to Exer. She kept replaying everything, thinking about how much she could have changed if she just used her powers sooner. Peri pushed those thoughts away, trying to focus on what she needed to do. Even so, she was dying to know what motivated the guy who brought her back after that beast attack. It suddenly hit her. Wasn't it Pandurnian who rushed to her side back then? Peri couldn't help but wonder if he'd healed her with his magic. It made sense to her, since he'd patched her up before. No sooner did she think about him than he just waltzed right into her room. She instantly blushed and was totally caught off guard seeing the Duke. Perry thought to herself what a crazy coincidence this was. Before she could even get a word out, he hit her with a question. He asked, all pissed off, why she was trying to protect her. Perry calmly replied that it was part of the job. He asked if she'd actually die for her if she were the real deal. Pandurnian couldn't wrap his head around why she'd defend someone who was cruel and demeaning. He brought up her weird attachment to the fake and said he finally understood. It was like, in his mind, there was no way she could ever leave this duchy. Pandurnian suddenly grabbed her hand, like he was trying to intimidate her. He glared at her, full of hate, and asked if she was some kind of spy. Perry protested, wondering how he could even suspect her of that. He doubled down, calling her a spy sent by the Western powers. Perry was even more shocked, totally lost as to why he'd think that. Looks like he jumped to conclusions after seeing her with Lord Hauntain. The girl insisted she wasn't involved with him in any way, shape, or form. She added that she was just playing along when he pretended to know her. Pandurnian saw no change in her pulse or body temperature. Still, the fact that she was a graduate of the Western powers bothered him. He demanded she tell him what she and Hauntain talked about in that room. She instantly remembered what Hauntain had told her about Pandurnian. Perry knew she had to say something, anything, to throw him off the scent. So, she finally admitted they'd been talking about the reason he was adopted. She saw the shock on his face and knew it was a really sensitive subject. Perry said he didn't have to answer and explained why she brought it up in the first place. He told her not to worry about it and then decided to open up. Perry definitely wasn't expecting him to share something so personal, it seemed. After a short pause, he started talking about the reason he was adopted. He looked at her and said he was a top-of-the-line puppet. Pandurnian stated confidently that he was made for the Duke's daughter. He was needed to pass on all the Exer holdings to Perrian. Perry froze, totally stunned, not understanding what he was even talking about. Pandurnian went on about how he was adopted for one single purpose. He lowered his gaze and said he was supposed to marry Lady Perrian. He always thought it was weird that they even bothered to take him in. They always valued bloodlines and disowned their own daughter. But they took him. Perry was lost in thought, wondering if that's really how it all went down. The guy said in an icy voice, "That's exactly how it went down." After that, the former Duke started spouting a bunch of nonsense at him. He kept saying Pandurnian could live however he wanted. Pandurnian smirked and concluded that now everything would go the way he wanted. Perry looked into his eyes and noticed his cocky attitude. It blew her mind how confident he was in his own skills. Pandurnian saw she was thrown off and said he didn't need her pity. Perry was relieved, because otherwise it would have been super awkward. She decided to ask him why he'd tell something like this to a simple servant. He said it didn't hurt him at all, and he could always get rid of her if he wanted to. Perrian smiled and said she really didn't get how his brain worked now. The guy looked down and said he didn't always get it himself either. He guessed it might be because she reminded him of Perry. Pandurnian mentioned he'd actually met the real Perrian before. Perry couldn't believe they could have possibly met. She was about to argue, but a guard burst into the room, yelling about trouble. He said the underground prison, where the fake was being held, had been destroyed. Pandurnian declared their conversation over and bolted towards the exit. Perry was bummed that the earthquake she caused had cut their chat short. Meanwhile, the fake had fallen through into some weird tunnel. She looked around, totally confused, trying to figure out where she was. Just a minute ago, she was in the underground prison until she blacked out. Her first thought was that someone attacked the prison to bust her out. The girl figured the earthquake was caused by her own people. She'd worked her tail off to earn their trust and get to this position. The second she heard footsteps, she spun around, all excited, begging for a rescue. You should have seen her face when she saw it was that bitch Brown. The girl called her out for the rude greeting and told her not to sweat it. She smirked and called the fake out by her real name, Cecile. She yanked the hanging cord and said she was about to drop her real name. Perry stepped into the light so the fake could see her hair color. The girl grinned, all smug, and introduced herself as Perrian Exer. Cecile saw the Exer family hair color and went white as a ghost. That's when it hit her. Brown had been the real Perrian all along. Cecile, totally freaked, started ranting about how the Duke's daughter was already dead. Like everyone else, Cecile had no clue Perrian's hair color could even change. She couldn't believe she was actually annoyed by a color everyone envies. Perry suggested they cut the pointless chatter, and she just give her consent. She added that it was useless for her to hope someone would come to her rescue. Cecile said her organization would be around to check if she'd spilled the beans. She added that Perian was guaranteed a life for the intel she mentioned. Perry was already thinking about sending Mello to dig up some dirt. Brown laughed and said all the members of the organization were right here with her. Cecile was shocked seeing all the bodies lying around. Perry smiled and said that she was the only fool here. She explained they were in a fake cave, and nobody was coming to rescue her. Perry added that Cecile couldn't escape from here, not even in the afterlife. She smiled again and mentioned she'd overheard a secret she shouldn't have. Right after that, the cave walls started shaking and crumbling like crazy. Cecile knew instantly that Perian had caused the earthquake. Perian kept on collapsing the cave, saying the game was over. As soon as she said that, the fake passed out cold. Perian decided to check something before sending her to the Holy Kingdom. She rifled through her pockets, looking for one important item. In her hands was the legendary artifact that could change appearances. She made sure to grab him, so Cecile wouldn't try to run off with him. Perry didn't need the artifact, but she still decided to take it for Momin and Mello. She was kinda surprised that something so valuable looked so ordinary. Perian touched the snow-white emblem and felt a glow. She was totally blown away when that light just washed over her. She dropped to her knees, feeling this weird, warm energy all through her. The next thing she knew, the artifact started cracking. She was shocked when she realized the light was gone and the artifact was busted. She froze in the middle of this deep cave, thinking about how she just broke it. Perian quickly stashed it in the box, deciding to play it cool like she had nothing to do with it. She decided to hand that responsibility over to Mello and move on to the next phase. Now she had to really finish things with the Xers. Just like she expected, the atmosphere in the duchy was awful. Even good old Phoenix was heartbroken when he found out the Duke's daughter wasn't the real deal. Looks like even all-knowing Larion took a major hit to the feels. He tried to hide it, but his actions screamed otherwise. On top of that, he asked her to stay and be their comfort. He saw it as a system where one heroine would replace the one they lost. Larion cynically wanted her to play the little sister role for the grieving brothers. He just wanted to keep her around like a doll, because she looked like his sister. That offer really threw her for a loop that day. He just calmly stated that she'd get used to him eventually. Perian refused to comfort them on behalf of the Duke's dead daughter. She snapped that he didn't need her. He needed to get his head checked and see a shrink. She was so pissed off by everything that the words just flew out of her mouth. After a short silence, Larion decided he had one thing to say to her. He said Perry was a good kid and asked her to remember that. Larion acted like he didn't even hear Perian's rejection. She repeated that she was leaving and hoped they wouldn't have any misunderstandings in the future. After that, she left the office, wondering if they'd all lost their minds. She was still stinging from the way she got ditched back then. Perry looked at the castle and knew, all over again, her mission was done. She figured everyone was on their own to deal with the fallout from this mess. The girl thought that, eventually, she'd find her true self too. Now all she had to do was say goodbye to the staff of the duchy. She took a step forward and spotted Elbry and Juris, her friends. The girl teared up. She was so worried about Perian. She was shocked to see Perry up and walking around after 10 days in a coma. Turns out, they were here to hand in their resignations. Elbry mentioned she got severance, then quietly whispered the amount to Perian. The girl was floored. That kind of money could set you up for life. Perry suddenly realized that Elbry would be free for a while. She considered transferring Elbry to the Holy Kingdom. Juris smirked, mentioning she'd gotten a special request from the Knight Squad. No surprise there, since Elbry was a seriously skilled knight. Perry knew it'd be selfish to tie her down to the Holy Kingdom. She smiled and told Elbry to pick whatever situation worked best for her. The girl returned the smile, promising she would. Juris decided to ask what Perian herself was planning after everything that went down. She barely got out that she was quitting too when they heard a weird chime. Phoenix dropped the bottle and was like, "What the hell is going on?" Perian couldn't help but think this kind of thing had happened before. He shot her this totally bummed out look and asked if she was really quitting. The guy looked so crushed. She didn't even know what to say. She pointed out, logically, that there was nothing left for her to do now that the mistress was gone. Perry was ready to settle everything right then and there, so she wouldn't change her mind. He asked if she thought getting another job was as easy as it was here. That question was so out of left field, it caught her off guard. He crossed his arms and said he was about to give her some advice, like an older brother. Phoenix started talking about how tough it would be to make it in the Holy Kingdom. Sounds like he was saying that because he was worried about her future. Still, she also figured he was just trying to hold her back. She thanked him for the advice, said she'd already thought it all through and made up her mind. Then she glanced at him, asked how he was feeling after everything that went down. She smiled, asked if he felt any better after letting it all out. Phoenix went red, asked if that could even make a difference. He admitted he actually fell for that fake, which was a mistake on his part. During that rough patch, he didn't expect someone like her, resembling Perry, to show up. He said at some point he started seeing her in a different light. Phoenix confessed she was starting to remind him more and more of Perian when she was a kid. Perian saw this coming, but hearing it still threw her for a loop. He was disgusted that his father and brother had buried the past. He judged them for it, right up until he found himself in the same boat. Looking at the maid, he could remember the good old days without feeling guilty. He acted like he didn't get his dad and brother's obsession, but he still wanted some comfort. Phoenix apologized for it, but his words gave Perry a weird feeling. She told him it was no big deal, since he wasn't alone in feeling that way. Perry said everyone has their own fantasies, whatever gets them through. She smiled and told him he didn't need to be so sorry about it. She figured the Duke's real daughter would have felt the same way. For a second there, what she said actually gave Phoenix some comfort. He cracked a smile and said he missed his little sister like crazy. She figured he was a goner when he told her he was grateful for everything. After that, Perry went to her room to get ready to bounce. She couldn't believe the day was almost here when she'd actually be leaving this place. She was surprised to see Larion hanging around outside her room. She said hey and asked him what he was doing there. To her surprise, he just kept quiet, his face turning beet red. After a long silence, he finally asked if she was really gonna leave them. Perian thought again that he was out of his mind and thought she was the real deal. She stepped closer and told him she really was leaving soon. The guy grumbled that it was a shame and walked off. She felt a little bad, but decided not to dwell on it. The thought of not being in this place tomorrow made her happy. In the morning, the girl hurriedly packed her bag and got ready to leave. She was about to head out when another maid ran up to her. The maid was happy she hadn't left yet and handed her a newspaper. It said the Perian estate was gone, something about a giant creature transport. She wasn't too worried, since her allowance had been deposited in the Holy Kingdom Bank yesterday. The maid pointed to the headline of an article on the next page. On top of everything else falling apart, the Holy Kingdom's bank just froze all assets for the first time ever. She knew right then and there that Larion had something to do with it. Perian crumpled the newspaper, a surge of rage bubbling inside her. After that, she went back to her room and tossed her bag on the bed. She really wanted to go back, but someone just had to throw a wrench in the works again. Perry knew she was leaving no matter what, but she wanted to give Larion a piece of her mind. She decided to use her little helpers to find out where he was. To her surprise, she found Phoenix and Larion going at it. It was the first time she'd ever seen Phoenix get so mad and yell at his brother. Felix asked why he had to make things so difficult for someone else. Larion just smirked and said he didn't get why he was so pissed off. He pointed out that Phoenix also leaned on Lady Perry and swayed his own people. Phoenix yelled that Larion had made it, so she had nowhere to go now. Larion was shocked he was getting this worked up over some random girl. Phoenix rubbed his forehead, frustrated, and asked what the reason was. He demanded to know why Larion had changed so much, become someone else. He just wanted his brother to say something to explain himself. Phoenix pressed, asking exactly what he saw back in that dark place. Larion sighed, exhausted, and reminded him he'd already explained all this a long time ago. Phoenix gritted his teeth and asked if he was really going to keep hiding everything. He walked right past his brother and said he didn't even know if he considered him family anymore. Perian overheard that and thought to herself, Larion wasn't always this messed up. Phoenix mentioned that Larion started acting weird after he saw something. She decided to put off arguing with Larion and try to get through to Phoenix instead. The girl went to the spot where Phoenix liked to be alone. He was surprised to see her and asked what she was doing there. Perry said she was in a bad mood today and suggested they grab a drink. Looks like he definitely wasn't expecting Miss Perry to be a drinker. Eventually, he took the bottle anyway and asked what she was planning to do next. She said thoughtfully that she had no choice but to shake things up with her family. So the girl tries to play the sympathy card, starts talking about her family. She lays it on thick about losing her folks in an accident, but then these awesome people took her in. Perry was jealous of their blood bond, always wondering what could have been. She said she feels like she's missing out sometimes, not being able to share all the tough stuff with them. Looks like that sob story actually worked. Hit him right in the feels. He admits he feels like an outsider in his own family sometimes too. Phoenix mentions it bugs him that his brother's keeping something big from him. Perion's surprised, 'cause she always thought they were tight. Phoenix says, all bummed out, that his brother's like totally changed, acting weird. It all started after he found out Perion vanished from the tower. Dad sensed something fishy was going on, some weirdness coming from an unknown source, and a crazy amount of cash. So he decided to dig into it and sent his son to check it out. He sent Larian Xer in to get the full story. He figured that would bring Perion back to the castle and free the tower. Reso walked up to Larian before he left for the tower. He looked his son in the eye before he made his final request. At that point, they already knew the real reason their father wanted an investigation. It was just an excuse to get Perion back to the castle. That day, Larian promised he'd definitely be back. He headed to the tower, feeling good, totally clueless about what he was about to find. When he got there, he saw these dolls, like corpse-looking things, just scattered everywhere like trash. The only thing this place showed was evidence that Perion had been messed with. Surprisingly, Perion wasn't there, and neither was anyone else alive. Larian was different after seeing this whole freaky scene. She thought he was traumatized, but it wasn't exactly that. The thing is, Larian went into the tower alone at first, which nobody knew. She figured he just wanted to see his sister ASAP. Phoenix found out he locked the door from the inside after he went in. The investigation team had a bunch of theories, but Larian said he wanted to preserve the crime scene. Perion thoughtfully called the whole thing a seriously weird story. That's exactly why Phoenix figured Larian must have seen something seriously messed up in there. Something so messed up, it could drive his usually chill and mature brother completely nuts. Sadly, it's a secret the guy just wouldn't cough up. Perion went deep into her own head, trying to figure out what the real deal was with this story. She brought up that other people saw the same thing, but they were living their lives just fine. Phoenix agreed with her, but that wasn't the only truth the world was missing out on. Perion was floored when she found out Larian hadn't left the tower for 3 whole days. He spent those 3 days in a place that was jam-packed with dolls. At first, Perry thought Phoenix was exaggerating, but now it felt like he was telling it like it is. The guy was lost in thought, wondering what the heck could have happened to his brother. He had no clue what Perion had been subjected to, or what those dolls were all about. Phoenix wanted to know what went down, but Larian kept shutting him out, time after time. They didn't realize Perion was making all those dolls because she was missing her family. She also made bodies after she got sick, which is why there were so many dolls that looked like her. There wasn't some crazy conspiracy going on like Phoenix thought. She understood she couldn't spill the beans, but decided to be supportive. She also said Larian wasn't talking about it to push him away. Perion explained that Larian was just missing the girl too, just like him. She added that in Larian's eyes, he's still the little bro. The girl looked at the guy and reminded him that they're still family. Phoenix realized he'd never even considered it that way before. He couldn't help but wonder what he would have done in Larian's shoes. He figured he wouldn't want to make him worry like that either. Up until now, he thought their family was falling apart for good. Perion added that Larian just wanted to protect his little brother. Phoenix suddenly jumped up and said he had to go see him right now. He took off, yelling back that he'd always be grateful for everything. Perion smiled, hoping those two could finally patch things up. Meanwhile, Phoenix finally showed up at Larian's place to talk. Larian pointed out that he'd just stormed off, and now he's back again. Phoenix looked down and asked if he remembered when Perion left the castle. He was just a kid back then, so he couldn't have done anything about it. Phoenix didn't know all the details, but he knew his brother had it even worse. He said it's been a long time, and that he can lean on him now too. He looked at Larian and said he wasn't going to leave him hanging. Phoenix asked him to let Miss Perry go and share the burden with him. They both knew damn well there was no replacing Perion. Larian just replied that Phoenix had gotten soft over the years. Phoenix started to say he was ready to change, but Larian told him to cut the crap. He repeated that he really shouldn't have crossed paths with Perry, and she just needs to be taken care of. Larian said she'd be better off if he never laid eyes on her again. Phoenix smirked, thinking he'd finally given in. He was stoked that, after all these years, they could finally switch places. They could still shape their future, even if Perry wasn't in the room. On the way home, Perry still couldn't believe she was finally leaving the duchy. Phoenix actually managed to bury the hatchet with Larian and sway his decision. Even though he was an Xer, he actually turned out to be useful to her. She was pumped to finally head to the Holy Kingdom. Perry couldn't wait to get to her real family, not the ones who dumped her. In the end, she never expected Mello to chew her out for the methods she used. She found out Moman went to explore a new continent. She'd known for a while she had to run all over the place to fix problems. Mello sighed, exhausted, and said he was glad she made it back okay. He looked at her and demanded a full report on what went down. She told him about the organization running the counterfeit operation. On top of that, there were individuals bankrolling the whole thing. She worked her way up the ladder, one by one, to find the ringleaders. That's how she was able to figure out who exactly sent the fake. She was ready for anything, not knowing what she'd uncover. Turns out, the whole scheme was being run by Hauntain Vendôme. She kept wondering how he knew everything, but it turned out to be way more complicated than that. One day, the maid Cecile said she'd be reporting her progress to Roxar. Roxar was Hauntain's uncle, the guy who was running the whole show. It was tough for them to do anything against the Vendôme family. They couldn't afford to make the most powerful guy in the country their enemy. She was surprised when Mello said they'd found the proof they were looking for. He was talking about everything they knew about her mother's death and what happened at the tower. Mello figured out that Roxar was the one who planned it all. He saw Perry's shocked face and decided to lay it all out for her. He and Momon suspected the fake Duke's daughter was the key to unlocking Alice's death. Then it hit him, a crucial detail. As soon as that fake Parian showed up, her face was plastered all over the news. What struck everyone as weird was how much she actually looked like Parian. Officially, the only picture anyone had of her was from when she was 3 years old. So the big question is, how the hell did they fake Parian's face as an adult? They had to have some seriously up-to-date intel to pull off that kind of disguise. He brought up the time she left the tower when she was 11. That's why they sent her in the first place, to see if some organization was behind it all. Now it clicks. Roxar was the one who saw her face back in the tower. Parian wanted to know why they'd been keeping such a huge secret under wraps. She wanted them to tell her about it before they started investigating. Mello said they ran a secret investigation, but couldn't find any leads. He added that they did it because they were worried about her and how she was doing. They figured she might get super bummed out if she knew the truth. Even so, Parian wasn't about to blame them for keeping it a secret. She understood why they did it, since she really could have freaked out. Mello turned away, looking ashamed, and saw her walking off somewhere. Parian sadly replied that she just needed to clear her head. Mello knew this would happen, which is why he didn't want to bring it up. He felt uneasy because there was another truth he hadn't told her. He and the Queen got real suspicious when they saw her true hair color. Looks like even Mayman didn't quite get what was happening with the girl. Mello said she went underground and was just bawling her eyes out that day. He figured she needed to be left alone so she could just cry it all out for once. They both started noticing some seriously weird stuff happening around Perry. Before, they thought her dad was that guy with the brown hair. He had some nerve, calling himself Perry's father in front of Rezo Xer. They figured he had a good reason to take that risk. But then Perry turned out to be an Xer descendant. After all that, Maman thought the answer to this whole thing was pretty clear. Looks like they wanted to get their hands on Perry from the get-go. They iced the Duchess Alice on purpose, just to snatch the kid. Now they were sure as hell a major organization was pulling the strings. Mom insisted they play it super careful while investigating. They couldn't leave any breadcrumbs that they were digging around. The woman smiled and asked them to keep it on the down low from Perry. Ever since then, he and the Queen have been quietly trying to ID them. They wouldn't have sent her to the Western Empire, but they managed to get some intel. Hauntain's uncle, Roxanne Wyndham, the regent of the Western Empire, is involved somehow. All that's left is to slowly chip away at their political power. But in their weakened state, that's damn near impossible. They only had one way to stand up to the Vendômes. They needed people with power who also wanted to take the Vendômes down a peg. Mello cursed under his breath when he thought about the Xers. They could only ask for their help if they revealed Perry's identity. Mello slammed his hand on the glass, realizing just how screwed they were. He knew that option would just give them exactly what they wanted. Sadly, they didn't even have power that could compare to the Xers. Meanwhile, back at the Xer estate, things were business as usual. He turned around and caught the maids giggling strangely from down the street. They were strolling down the lane, casually chatting about something. Pandurnian realized their voice was totally different from that servant girl's. He couldn't figure out why he was acting so out of character whenever he thought about her. Pandurnian remembered again the time he carried her to her room in his arms. That night, he even said something he absolutely shouldn't have. It hit him for the first time that he'd been addressing her with respect ever since they met. He knew she was just a servant, but he still treated her differently. Pandurnian wished he could see her again, just to figure out why. He kept reminding himself that she was gone, but he still couldn't stop thinking about her. The guy was sure they'd never cross paths again. He heard a weird noise coming from the haunting comm channel, which he never even used. To his shock, he actually managed to make a sound for the first time. Haunting announced he's heading to the Holy Kingdom to propose to that maid. He was pissed, wondering what that son of a gun was planning this time. Meanwhile, Perry was thinking about how those people were connected to her past. She couldn't figure out how the Queen and Mello could keep the truth from her. She instantly remembered her conversation with Phoenix and realized she was in a similar spot. She knew that they'd always had her back, no matter what. Even so, she was confident she still would have nailed the mission. Perian decided to stop dwelling on it and focus on her future. She decided she needed to dig up the dirt on the Vendams. They needed a power that could match them, and that was the Exer family. Still, to do that, she'd have to reveal that she's a Perian. Mello already knew about the connection between the fake and what happened to her mom. He probably already figured it out, but he didn't say anything to her. She ran to Mello's office to give him a piece of her mind. Perry threw open the door and guessed he was just overthinking things. She figured he was racking his brain about getting to the Roxars and thought about the Exers. She knew he was also torn about whether or not to expose her identity. Mello agreed, but didn't get why she thought it was so crazy. He said he couldn't do that to her. Spill all the beans like that. Perry said that's exactly why she thinks it's a dumb idea. She said she can play nice with the Exers for the sake of their precious kingdom. She gets that they might resort to this, since they can't handle things on their own. Perry wants to avenge her mother, get some leads, and wipe Roxar off the map. Still, by relying on other countries, they'll never truly be independent. She called it something they gotta do themselves, and raised her hand. Perian smiled and promised she'd make their country great again. Mello couldn't believe how dedicated she was to the kingdom. He couldn't help but remember back when he first heard her say that as a kid. She was smiling and saying she'd make the kingdom great. He smiled, seeing she hadn't changed a bit since then. Perry figured they should start by questioning the fake. They'd tried questioning her over and over, but it was all useless. Cecile wasn't so simple, since she still hadn't uttered a word. Mello suggested they take their time and prepare for anything. Perry agreed and didn't want to do anything to hurt the Holy Kingdom. They couldn't do anything right now, but they could prepare for the future. Perry said she trusted him and asked him to tell her if he found anything out. She left, saying she was going to cheer herself up by going to the theater. Mello frowned sadly, realizing he'd lied to her again. Last time, he tried to get Cecile to open up and spill some new info. He was trying to pry out where they got so many bodies, but she wasn't saying a damn thing. Cecile said her organization was the one bringing in the fresh corpses. What struck her as weird was how a lot of them looked like the Duke's daughter. I guess Mello was expecting any answer but that one. It kept bugging him, because he didn't see any signs of magic. He figured they were using the dolls Perry made back at the tower. Mello was wondering how much longer he could keep this under wraps. He was worried Perian would change after she learned the whole truth. Meanwhile, Perry had already arrived at the Holy Kingdom Theater. She smiled, realizing he hadn't changed a bit. The girl eagerly scanned the posters, trying to decide what to see. This theater held special memories, since Maman used to bring her here. Perian used to be scared of adults, but the show calmed her anxiety. They were amazing creatures who rescued kids, not messed with them. Maman tried to explain to the girl that adults protect children. From that day on, Perian went to the theater almost every day. She was about to watch a familiar show again, but someone stopped her. She turned around and saw Hauntain, who said he'd been looking for her. He gave a knowing smile, waiting to see how she'd react. Perian was floored that he'd show up in the Sacred Kingdom. She figured he might know who she really was, so she decided to play along for now. She calmly answered his question and asked what brought him here. He smirked and said he wasn't here for the show, but for her. On top of that, he added he needed to talk, which made her nervous. She couldn't even begin to guess what he wanted to discuss. She went silent, completely stunned when he casually proposed. She assumed he was talking about some kind of staged marriage thing. Perian heard him out, then said it was unlikely he actually liked her. Hansine closed his eyes and said he guessed he should start explaining himself. He suggested we go somewhere more private to talk. They stopped at a cafe downtown and each ordered a drink. Hansine asked how often she came to this little hole in the wall. Perian mentally chewed him out for being so condescending. She figured he must think she's some kind of simpleton. Perry suspected he already knew about her connection to the Xers. Still, he had no clue about her magic, her spying, or her ties to the royals. She thought she could let her guard down a little and repeated the question. He smiled and admitted that his proposal wasn't exactly driven by romantic feelings. Hansine added that it had to do with his family. Turns out there was a faction inside that was dead set against him taking over. He was going to put up with their crap until he became duke. But things just got way too real. Hansine announced he's seriously looking into who's next in line for the dukedom. He asked her if she understood the obstacles standing in his way. Perian knew damn well the problem was his marital status. Even so, he wasn't about to marry someone he didn't even give a damn about. He confessed he'd been thinking about her ever since they met at that fancy dinner. They had to bail early that day, but he couldn't stop thinking about how she got hurt. Hansine looked at her and said he wanted to make her happy. He said straight up that he wanted a bride just like her. Perian didn't exactly trust him, but she still felt awkward about the whole thing. She faked being flustered, thinking his words were total BS. She knew all the opposing factions had been taken care of a long time ago. Even that marriage talk was a load of hooey, since his parents were basically losing their grip. He was saying he wanted to make her happy, but the creepy look in his eyes gave him away. She could read him like a book and knew he was lying about everything, start to finish. Perian said she wouldn't be against a contract marriage for a couple of years. Hansine stroked her hand and told her she could lay out her terms. He couldn't even fathom her turning him down. She knew her status might be on the way out and decided to teach him a lesson. Perian awkwardly looked away and said she couldn't give him the answer he wanted. Hansine asked what the reason was, since he hadn't said anything out of line. The guy declared he'd do anything for her, anything she asked. You can imagine his surprise when she straight up told him he just rubbed her the wrong way. Perry stood up and said she'd pretend this conversation never happened. Then she ditched him, saying she'd leave first. She froze, totally surprised, when she heard the cafe door slam open. She looked up and saw Pendernian himself, standing right there. He noticed she was shocked and immediately moved closer to her. Pendernian asked sadly if it was true she was marrying Hansine. Perian shot a glance at Hansine, trying to figure out how he knew. She saw a sly grin on his face and realized he was behind it all. The girl tried to explain that Hansine was feeding him a load of bull. She said their talk about a wedding was just a bit of harmless fun. She figured Hansine was just pulling a prank to get him over here. Hansine mysteriously looked away and said he wasn't kidding around at all. Pendernian got worked up and said he couldn't just say things like that. Perry wasn't just some resident of the Holy Kingdom. She was a media darling. Hansine knew the public would be buzzing if they ever tied the knot. He lowered his gaze and asked what he should do if his heart already belonged to Perry. The guy added that it had nothing to do with politics and promised to protect Perry. He asked if Pendernian had any reason to object. Hansine implied that maybe he was objecting because of personal feelings. Perry watched all this and noticed how smoothly Hansine was playing it. She figured he'd planned this whole thing from the start. The girl felt disgusted looking at his smug face. She couldn't just stand by, not after everything that happened back at the academy. Perian decided to flip the script and catch him off guard. She smiled and said she never expected him to be so genuine. Perry decided to seize the moment and said she would marry him. Even back in the academy, she was profiling people and keeping tabs on everyone. She stumbled onto Hansine by accident and knew right away he was playing a game. Perry was the only one watching him every hour, and she could see right through him. He looked perfect and amazing on the outside, but inside he was a real piece of work. He sorted people like they were just resources, boosting the ones who could make it big. Over time, she realized it wasn't personal. He was just cold and calculating. He acted like it was his duty to control everything and everyone. Based on that, he saw Perry, the foreigner, as totally worthless. After a while, the people in her group started rotating constantly. The new students kept giving her a hard time because of where she came from. They had her cornered, demanding to know if the rumors about the kingdom were true. One of them even said their queen was, using her influence to get what she wanted in negotiations. Perry snapped and got violent because they were disrespecting the queen who saved her life. It caused a whole mess of trouble back then. The academy even considered kicking her out. She was crying, trying to feel better by thinking about what Mammon and Mello thought of her. Perian was sobbing in a corner of the library, thinking she'd found a good hiding spot. She looked up, startled, when she heard someone approaching. Hauntain was standing right there, looking at her like she was dirt. Perian immediately started racking her brain, trying to figure out why he was there. To her surprise, all he did was give her this knowing look and ask if she was sad. That was her first and last encounter with Hauntain. For whatever reason, this whole mess ended thanks to Hauntain. His face went totally blank, but his actions screamed he was trying to hide something shady. She didn't get his real angle, but she was just glad she could finish up at the academy. Back then, she figured it wasn't that big of a deal, but she was ready to change her tune if he tried pulling anything again. Hauntain lit up and said he was thrilled that his feelings were reciprocated. Perian suggested talking about the engagement later and said she wanted to discuss everything with the Duke. Hauntain was good to go after she promised to smooth things over. He said they'd catch up later and then bailed. Pandurnian realized with disappointment that he'd come all this way for nothing. The girl glanced back as he spoke to her, lost in thought. He asked if she honestly believed she'd become a duchess. He'd thought she was good at weighing the odds. That's why she asked him for help. He told her she'd just thrown away her last lifeline. Perian was shocked by how cuttingly he said that. She said she wasn't about to spill the Exer family secrets. The man snapped, saying that wasn't what he was worried about right now. Perian smiled sweetly and asked what was bothering him. Pandurnian felt a little flustered, seeing that gentle, girlish smile again. Peri just dropped a bomb, saying she knows why he cares so much about her. She's guessing it's because Lady Perian still means something to him. She's convinced he still respects her, maybe even looks up to her. He clenched his fist and snapped, asking what she could possibly know, saying stuff like that. Perian said she doubts he even knows how he felt when he heard she was gone. She gently squeezed his hand and said she had something to tell him. The girl gave him a dreamy smile and said he can finally forget about Perian. She's been wanting to tell him for ages that he's perfect just the way he is. Perian or no Perian. She pulled her hand away, hoping that from now on, he'll only live for his own happiness. Perian had no idea how he'd react, but she just couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. Pandurnian was pissed, thinking he wasn't so down bad that he needed comfort from a maid. He knew he should be blowing his top right now, but he just couldn't. Pandurnian knew she was a completely different person, but he was still drawn to her. He felt like he was losing his voice every time she was close. Peri smiled and explained that from today on, he didn't have to worry about her. She implied that she accepted Hauntain's offer for her own personal reasons. After that, she left without waiting for him to say a single word. The man froze, realizing that the number of questions had only increased. He suddenly realized that he hadn't come because he was worried about her. And he wasn't thinking of her as Perian either, which was something. It's been a whole 3 days since Hauntain popped the question. The world's still buzzing about their upcoming wedding. The whole freaking continent's shaken over the love story of a maid and an heir. Perian was floored that the wedding was planned for just 4 months away. He just smirked and said she wouldn't have any plans, seeing as she's retired. Things were moving along nicely, which is why she was headed to the Western Empire. The papers were full of headlines saying Hauntain had lost his marbles. On top of that, they just kept cranking out stories trashing Peri. They were debating whether a maid was worth launching a luxury cruise train for. She shoved the paper away, totally done, and told him to cut it out. Hauntain smirked, said it was kind of fun hearing what people were buzzing about. Unlike her, he wasn't the main character in the gossip mill, getting buried in a mountain of crap. They were right inside the cruise train, a national treasure of the West. This train could fly, and it was made up of a ton of connected cars. Originally, it was built as a way for rich folks to get around. This time, they launched it to introduce Perian to the public. She was going to meet the nobles before the wedding. Hauntain had already thought of it. Hauntain, like he read her mind, said the guests would start arriving soon. He held out his hand and said everyone was coming to check her out. The guy locked eyes with her, told her not to let him down. She reached out and agreed, calling him Mr. Hauntain. He smiled, surprisingly warm, and told her to just call him Sunbae. Perian awkwardly turned away, hearing that they'd be stopping soon. He smiled again, telling her to get ready. The Duke and Duchess of Vendôme were supposed to be the first ones up. After a while, they froze, waiting for the first guess. Perian carefully studied her future relatives. Before her stood an older couple, their faces showing the marks of a long life. The nobles immediately started gossiping about how they were finally meeting Perry. They figured the Duke and Duchess would welcome their daughter-in-law with open arms. Perian clutched her dress and hurried to greet them with respect. The girl gave a confident bow and said her name was Perry. All she got in return was a piercing stare from the Duchess. She blatantly walked right past the girl without saying a word. Looks like Fontaine wasn't exactly surprised by that kind of disrespect. Luckily for her, the Duke was more polite and said he was glad to meet her. Then, he moved on ahead too, trying to catch up with his wife. That little scene made it pretty clear the Duchess didn't approve of her daughter-in-law. Perian knew the woman wasn't doing it out of hatred, but because she was going through a lot. Sabira Vendham had lived her entire life at the very top. She was known throughout the world as a woman of refined taste and deep feelings. The source of her despair was her family, leaving her without the strength to even respond. After observing her for so long, Perian realized she was deeply troubled. Meanwhile, the woman hurried to hide in the greenhouse of the cruise train. She hadn't expected Fontaine to make the greenhouse just like the one back at the duchy. The woman was stunned by the things her son had been doing. Out of all the offers he received, he chose a maid who resembled that child. Sabira saw her in person and realized she looked even more like her than she'd imagined. She remembered the first time she saw Princess Perian 20 years ago. Back then, Alice, the Duchess from the Eastern Empire, used to visit them often. She watched her fearless son show a human side for the first time, right there with her. It filled her with joy every time she saw it. All these years, she thought Fontaine had completely forgotten his childhood. She didn't get why he'd choose to marry that girl of all people. More and more, she realized she was actually scared of her own son. Meanwhile, things weren't exactly peaceful for the people of the Exarduchy either. Larian kept dreaming about teaching Perry to read when they were kids. She always wanted him to read her stories about krakens and monsters. Her interest surprised Larian, but he read to her anyway. He'd sit her down next to him and read her the story about the Kraken girl. He kept having that dream until Pandarian burst into the room. He chewed the guy out for lazing around in bed on such a big day. He ordered his brother to wake up already, since he had to leave soon. Larian didn't want to wake up. He hadn't dreamed about Perry in ages. He rubbed his bloodshot eyes and reminded himself he'd see the face he longed for soon. He remembered that Fontaine was traveling by train after the engagement. Pandarian was alarmed by this news and ordered him to visit the Western Empire. Whatever the reason, he was just happy he'd get to see Perry. He suddenly wondered again what kind of expression she had on her face right now. Meanwhile, Perian was hanging out with the Western noblewomen. They were really going overboard, trying to show her how great their Western food was. Perian just smiled at them, even though she didn't really trust these chicks. She knew perfectly well they'd been talking trash about her behind her back not too long ago. She could have just ignored it all. But there was this one other thing. This train kept chugging along, vibrating every single second. It was making it tough for her little earth elementals to keep their shape. She was trying to figure out how to keep her little spy game going. One of the girls asked if Fontaine knew about her working as a maid. She figured it could be an issue if she was keeping secrets. Perian was surprised she decided to just come right out and be a jerk. She was about to play along and say yes, but someone already did it for her. Her heart stopped when Juris said he knew about it and was over the moon. That was a real shocker for Perian, totally threw her for a loop. The instigator got pissed and demanded to know who she was. Juris smiled and introduced herself as the new bride's escort. Looks like it was the first time Perian herself had heard anything about this. After that, she suggested they go somewhere private to get all the deets. Juris reminded her how she said back in the duchy that she'd come back west and find work. To her surprise, Juris was hired by the girl's future husband. Fontaine seemed caring on the surface, but they hadn't talked about him assigning her a handler. She decided to be careful, since she didn't know if he'd bribed Juris. Juris walked closer and quietly asked if they were sharing a couple's bed. She made it clear she was kidding and said she was really happy to see her. Perian smiled and said she'd actually feel a lot calmer. After that, time flew by and the train arrived at another destination. Meanwhile, it was time for a non-stop stream of fancy guests. Perian was dressed to the nines, just like Fontaine told her, and making small talk that went nowhere. And just like that, another tough week went by without a single minute to rest. She was trying to recover from the day the train stopped at the Emperor's palace. Fontaine smiled gently and asked if she'd had a rough day. The girl just sighed, saying he never ceased to amaze her. She admitted it was hard being around him when he acted like nothing was wrong. What surprised her was that he still had so much energy after all those talks with the nobles. He asked her to hang in there a little longer, saying some important guests were arriving today. Perry remembered today was the day they visited the Western Imperial Palace. She mentally braced herself, knowing the person she loathed most would be among the crowd. That guy was responsible for her mother's fate, set up her fake father, and locked her away. He was the one who ruined her life and dragged her down to the depths. That man was Roxor Vendham. Perry knew this meeting would be tough and tried to prepare herself as best she could. There was another reason she started hating him back in the academy days. She found out the Empire's factory was developing weapons and decided to check it out. This wasn't just any factory. She felt sick the moment she walked in. She was certain there was some kind of hidden space beneath the ground she was standing on. That's how she ended up witnessing human experimentation. She kicked up a fuss, and the ones responsible were caught and sent to the kingdom. During questioning, they learned it was research into creating bioweapons. Mello crossed his arms and said she noticed something else weird too. Usually, people try to improve the product they're creating, right? But these researchers were focused on weakening it. They wiped out pain and emotions to build the perfect prototype. Basically, they wanted to create something you couldn't even call human anymore. Perry found out Roxor ran that factory and figured he might have experimented on Hontaine. She had a feeling that gnawing discomfort she felt was connected to it. Her guess was they scrubbed his emotions to make the ultimate ruler. She was so lost in thought, she wasn't even reacting to him. Hontaine wanted to know why, but she was having trouble answering. She was totally spaced out until he tugged on her cheek. He grinned and said that always snaps her back to reality. Perian couldn't figure out why such a stone-cold dude was acting so childish. She didn't think she could be special to him, but he was still acting all weird. Perian snapped back to reality when she heard the train was about to pull in. She overheard someone suggest going to the waiting room and decided to take charge again. Perry remembered she'd soon have to face the guy who started all this mess. She'd almost forgotten her brother was even coming to visit. Turns out, she's got to meet up with Lyrian Exer too. Seeing them together in person, the whole situation felt even stranger. Roxar was just standing there smiling, like he hadn't done all those terrible things. It was sickening that Lyrian, so obsessed with his family, showed up as well. He whispered for her to chill out, 'cause her brother was here. She turned away, thinking he was a total nutjob. Roxar just kept grinning and asked her to introduce his future sister-in-law. All he did was keep sweet-talking about how they'd be family soon. She thought about how many times she'd already run this simulation. Perry tried to stay calm, right up until the look in his eyes changed. She remembered seeing that psycho look before. It made her feel like the floor was dropping out from under her. She remembered being witness to this kind of scene once before. He tried to run tests on her when she was trapped in the tower. The guy repeatedly ran experiments on Perry's endless bodies. That night, he looked at her and offered to smoke her out. Just remembering that night made the girl feel like she was suffocating all over again. Roxar immediately moved towards her, asking if she was okay, but she couldn't calm down. She remembered again how she ran up the stairs, the smoke chasing her. The girl sobbed, looking back at the deadly haze coming after her. That night, she prayed that someone, anyone, would come to her rescue. She was lost in these memories when a hand reached out to her. Lyrian grabbed her hand and looked at her, trying to soothe her. He called her Perian and asked if she was all right. Perry realized that he was the one she'd dreamed of seeing when she was suffering in the tower. Still, it was way too late to worry about that now. Meanwhile, Juris was stuck on how Roxar hadn't even noticed her. She took a sip of champagne, thinking about Roxar and Perry already meeting. The girl wondered how she should act towards Perry if she got closer to Roxar. She turned around, surprised, when she heard the door burst open. Juris went pale when she saw something she definitely wasn't expecting. She couldn't figure out why Lyrian was carrying Perry in his arms. Turns out, Perry only woke up once she was back in her room. She groggily sat up and tried to figure out where she was this time. The girl could barely remember why she'd ended up here in the first place. She remembered that when she first met Roxar, she was flooded with memories. Perry couldn't believe she'd forgotten about it for so long. She'd even forgotten how the researchers celebrated, thinking she was a great find. Now they had a safe way to get materials back to the lab. Perry huddled in a corner, watching the men talk about her. Right in front of her, they started discussing what they needed to do to get more bodies. Now she understood. They were turning her dolls into raw materials to use when processing the monsters. If she didn't have her ability, monster product processing wouldn't be as advanced as it is. She tried to tell herself it wasn't her fault, but she couldn't. Perry tried to accept that they'd be wiping out entire villages if it wasn't for her. The girl tried to convince herself that her suffering wasn't for nothing. She remembered the time a boy came to see her. Unlike the others, he didn't seem scary, but actually shone. He was like some fairy tale prince, one who didn't inspire fear. It suddenly hit her. That kid looked just like Duke Pendernian. Now she understood why he was so sure she was a goner. She remembered the time she straight up died right in front of him. Perian tried to figure out why he'd even bothered visiting her back then. Juris burst into her room and found her awake. The girl said she'd brought her to her room after she'd passed out. Juris mentioned Larion carried her, which is gonna start some juicy rumors. People were already whispering about her working for the Xers. Juris couldn't wrap her head around why Hantine would hand her over to Larion. She didn't get how he could do that if he actually cared about her. Perry was wary of Juris at first, but now she sees she's not playing both sides. The girl's sudden concern brought a smile to her face, and she felt grateful. Juris noticed Perry was acting like everything was cool again. Meanwhile, Roxar and Hantane were still hanging around in the waiting room. The guy summed it up, saying his bride-to-be was way weaker than he expected. He smirked and said he was definitely surprised when he saw her face. The guy said she looks just like the Xer's daughter who was in the tower. Hantine smirked, thinking about how Perry is the Duke's real daughter. He'd known it from the start and figured it was his ace in the hole. The guy decided to keep that info from Roxar. He figured Perry was just running on feelings and had nothing going for her but her bloodline. Hantine was sure Roxar would win, no matter what she did. He left the guy and headed straight to the girl's room. He had a thing for these moments, the stuff that happens on the train. He saw it all as a fleeting amusement that would soon be gone. Hantine found her already in the room and asked her how she was feeling. He said he was totally freaked out when she collapsed. The guy apologized, saying he had no idea she was going through so much. He admitted he should have been paying more attention to her. She was disgusted by his words, knowing he deliberately let Larion carry her out. She decided to play along and playfully scolded him for being so indifferent. Perry said she already knew he just needed someone for a sham marriage anyway. She looked at him and asked if he felt even a tiny bit of something for her. Hantane smirked again and asked if it just dawned on her. Perian blushed and told him to show her, not just say it. She let him take her hands and said she just wanted to stop worrying. She looked him in the eye, knowing damn well this wasn't love. She let him kiss her, figuring they were just using each other. Hantine pressed his forehead against hers and stared into her violet eyes. The girl smiled, silently vowing she'd win this game. Hantine returned the smile, thinking victory would be his. After that, he leaned in and kissed her softly. The next day, Hantane's mother was strolling through the greenhouse again. She was impressed by how perfectly everything was arranged. Alice used to come to this greenhouse a lot and hang out here. Looks like the woman definitely wasn't expecting to find Perian here. The girl beamed and greeted Madame Sabira. At first, the woman didn't even know how to react to this kid showing up. Perian thought to herself that her timing was perfect. She'd only come to the greenhouse to meet with Sabira. Her blank stare showed just how deep her depression was. She knew getting close wouldn't be easy, but Perry had an ace up her sleeve. The girl decided to use her special way of talking about medical stuff. She added a couple of things to the food and tea to help with the problem. Perian said she was finding it tough to deal with people from high society right now. She clutched the hem of her dress and said she wanted to know a few things. She gave this awkward smile and asked Sabira for a favor. Perian wasn't exactly brimming with confidence, but Sabira's reaction was even worse. She just came right out and asked if she even wanted to talk to her. Madame Sabira sized the girl up, then started in. First thing she said was that Perian needed to work on her gaze. At first, Perian didn't even catch what she meant. She looked at the woman and asked her to explain what she was talking about. Even though she asked, the woman just gave her this loaded silence. She told her not to sweat it and to just speak up if she didn't know something. Perian kept trying to say she wanted to talk, but Sabira demanded she get specific. She knew they wouldn't exactly become best buds overnight. She said she just wanted to show her what she was really like. Perian mentioned that a lot of the Blue Bloods were talking smack about her. She asked Sabira to judge her based on her own experiences, not just gossip. Perry almost called her request unreasonable, but Sabira's vibe totally shifted. The girl realized that after she spoke, the Duchess was looking at her differently. It seemed to Perian like the Duchess was remembering something as she looked at her. She turned away and said she wasn't planning on hanging out or having a chat. Still, she knew it wouldn't be right to just ditch her guest like that. To Perian's surprise, the woman even offered to have a cup of tea. She flashed a smile and said yes to the offer. Perian had no clue what made Madame Sabira change her mind. From then on, she started dropping by the Duchess's place with sweets all the time. She'd been coming to the greenhouse for 3 weeks straight, bringing tea and desserts. Every time, Perian slipped in some meds to help her with the blues. Sabira suddenly realized she felt at peace whenever Peri was around. Perian decided to keep quiet about how she was pulling it off. She was all smiles, saying she felt like they were getting closer. The woman couldn't help but think back to the girl's request that first time. Her actions, the way she carried herself, it was impossible to miss the crazy resemblance. Sabira realized this girl looked eerily like Alice. She mentally reached out to her friend, wondering what the heck she should do. After that, the awesome day just faded into the black of night. Fontaine was stuck thinking about how today had been a real grind. He wanted to let Perian know he was back, but she wasn't in the room. He gave her space to build some connections, but she's been staying out later and later. The guy just sat down on the empty bed, lost in thought, like he was trying to figure something out. He started remembering the first time he kissed her. He knew they were an unlikely match, but she still wasn't trying to get any closer to him. Fontaine tensed up, realizing he was going to have to make a move soon. He shot out of bed, threw on a robe, and headed straight for Roxar. The guy was surprised to see him barging into his room so late. Roxar also pointed out that she's been spending a lot of time with Sabira lately. Fontaine announced that he'd be bringing a different lady as his date to the upcoming banquet. The guy was taken aback, asking who that would leave Lady Peri with. Fontaine replied that he didn't know yet, since all the big shots would be there eyeing her. He knew she'd feel super awkward if she showed up without a partner. Fontaine gave a cold smile and told her to just go alone. Then he just split, leaving Roxar alone with his thoughts. He was floored that Fontaine was ditching his fiancée to go to the ball with someone else. Roxar smirked, realizing he hadn't given his heart to his bride. He used to think Fontaine was led by his feelings when he chose Peri. However, now he understood that it was all cold calculation. He tried to dig up dirt on his bride, but everything was squeaky clean. Roxar figured, with a monster living in the tower, Fontaine might have noticed something. He knew this because Fontaine's body was mixed with Perian dolls. The man turned around when he heard someone crying. He saw a woman sitting in the distance near his room, holding a baby. Roxar reminded her that he'd asked her to keep it down. Turns out, sitting on the floor of his room was Princess Ala West of the Western Empire. She glared at the guy who'd gotten her into this mess. He told her there was no going back now, and she needed to chill out. Roxar added, all thoughtful-like, that both the past and the future were set in stone. Little did he know, Peri was watching the whole thing. She couldn't figure out what the heck the Western Empire's princess was doing here. He took over as regent because the previous emperor and empress kicked the bucket on the same day. Their relatives got screwed over and couldn't do a damn thing about it. This whole thing was the work of the aristocrats, led by Vendôme. His goal was to break anyone who'd ever stood by the late emperor. After a while, Roxar crowned a prince named after him, making him the new emperor. The princess was supposed to inherit the throne, but Roxar insisted otherwise. They prepped the princess for the throne since she was a kid, drilling her on everything she needed to know. Nevertheless, she lost her position and power in an instant. The good news was, she hated Roxar's guts and wasn't about to give up. Perian remembered the day she first snuck into the Western Empire's palace. She secretly brought baby formula and food to those abandoned kids. Perian was just glad she could help her out during a rough patch. She remembered that the princess and Sabira were supposed to meet tomorrow. Peri wanted to get on the princess's good side, no matter what it took. The next morning, she was blown away by the sight before her. She couldn't get over how awesome the view was from the speeding train. Now she could actually chill and talk to Sabira, now that she'd helped her out. Things were way better now than when they first met, that's for sure. Perian was stoked that Sabira was inviting her to hang out. They were soaking in the scenery until a servant showed up. He announced that the princess and the emperor had arrived at the conservatory. Sabira casually told him to let them know they could come on over. Peri still felt a rush of nerves bubbling up inside her before the meeting. She decided to find out the reason why the servant had come. Sabira calmly explained that the emperor and princess were there. Perian put on a surprised act, like she wasn't expecting anything like this. They'd stopped at the palace once before, but Perian had blacked out. She figured in her head that the reason they were here had something to do with her. She closed her eyes and realized that Sabir was way kinder on the inside than he let on. Perian was incredibly grateful for the help she'd been given. The next thing they knew, Alo and Roxar West were standing in front of them. The princess asked with a sneer if this was really the one who was going to marry Hontaine. Perian answered, understanding why she was being so hostile. The princess smirked and said Hontaine must have rocks in his head. She slammed him for picking some clueless woman. Perian quickly bowed, greeting the princess. Before, she hid who she was and helped out, not even realizing how much Alo had changed. She'd grown into someone who was wary of others, which wasn't exactly shocking. Looks like only the kid was cool with Perry. Out of nowhere, he reached out and pointed at her, babbling something. Perian was surprised, not even sure how she should react. Alo turned to her brother and asked him why he was acting like that. The kid just kept reaching out, like he wanted to give her a hug. She figured maybe he remembered how warm she was when she used to feed him. Still, the Perry doll back then was a lot different than the one standing there now. Looks like even Sabir thought it was kinda cool he recognized her. She'd heard the emperor was supposed to be pretty shy. The princess didn't dig his reaction, so she told him he messed up. She announced they were leaving today and would talk another time. Perian knew she couldn't just let her walk away like that, so she tried to stop her. Out of the blue, she asked if she liked candy. The princess frowned and asked why she was even asking about that. She pulled out a jar of candies her friend had made. They were magically infused to boost your mood. Perry held out the jar and said she'd been saving them just for their meeting. Princess Alo realized these candies reminded her of the past. Roxar was too busy chasing fame to care about them. Sometimes he didn't even feed her. She remembered those days spent in need and despair. Luckily for her, there was a benefactor who helped them out with different things. He brought baby formula, diapers, and basic necessities. That little bit of help reminded her that it wasn't time to give up yet. The girl accidentally found the colorful candies in a jar. She knew she couldn't feed them to a newborn baby. Alo realized they were left for her, like she was a kid too. She thoughtfully examined the jar, which looked like that very same candy jar. Perian went quiet, then asked if she really didn't care about them. In a flash, the girl silently snatched the box right out of her hands. She said she'd accept them, because she couldn't just ignore the sincerity. After that, she said goodbye and took off as fast as she could. Perian was stoked that her plan worked, and everything went off without a hitch. She figured those sweets might warm the princess up and help her sleep. Plus, she slapped a note on them, saying they were a gift from a secret admirer. She didn't give a damn what Roxar thought of her, but she was supposed to be Hontaine's future wife. Perry felt a weight lift off her shoulders after giving that present. After that, she decided to get started on tea time with Sabira. Perian clearly expected a different reaction and was feeling pretty awkward. She thought Sabira and the princess would hit it off. She was hoping they could be political allies down the line. But things were way more complicated than that. Perry perked up when Sabira finally decided to say something. She looked away and said that sadly, "Not all kids are winners, you know?" Perian, surprised, asked her who exactly she was talking about. Sabira couldn't help but compare the emperor to little Hontaine. The woman suddenly said that Princess Perian was actually pretty cute. Perian, caught off guard, asked her why she thought so. She couldn't figure out how Sabira knew what she looked like as a kid. Her heart froze when Sabira mentioned that Alice loved to brag to her. Perian couldn't figure out when her mother and Sabira even found the time to meet up. She learned that Alice used to visit Sabira in the Western Empire. The woman said she was a wonderful lady and a knight. She was really bummed that Lady Alice passed away so young. Larian suddenly jumped into their conversation, saying that Perry shouldn't be the only one hearing this. He said it concerned him too, and then asked if he could join them. The guy said he had a dream about his little sister earlier today. Perian gave Sabira a pleading look, hinting for her to shoo him away. Still, Sabira couldn't exactly stop him from being involved in something like this. He finally sat down, and Sabira started telling her story. She first met Alice when Hontaine was a little older. Perian stopped her, reminding her that the two empires had already broken off relations by then. Sabira explained that Alice infiltrated their territory alone back then. She looked away and said that Alice snuck into their castle that day. Perian was surprised, knowing that could have sparked a whole mess. With each new story, she was more and more amazed by what kind of person her mom was. Larian said his mother was the type to pull off some wild stuff. He guessed she envisioned a future where the two empires came together. Sabira replied that Alice just showed up whenever she felt like it. First, they were just bragging about their kids. Then they wanted her daughter to marry Huntain. The woman added that there was nothing special about their relationship. Their relationship was nothing more and nothing less than friendship. Larian said goodbye and said she'd be back, but Sabira ordered her not to return. After a short silence, she called him a loudmouthed kid. She thought he was weird and said that staying away from him would be the best bet. The woman was happy when Perian said she hated him too. Sabira suddenly declared that she'd tell her everything, the way it really happened. Turns out, she'd bent the truth a little about Alice when she was talking to Larian. Perry tried to figure out why she would trust her with this. She asked why she decided not to tell Alice's son about it. The woman smiled and reached out her hand to her. Sabira stroked her head and said she could only share this with another woman. Perian was shocked by Sabira's unexpectedly kind demeanor. She said that Alice came to them to help a woman who wasn't thinking straight. It was her goal to help the Duchess, who gave her life for her child. Sabira was born into an imperial family and raised as an aristocrat. Getting the title of Duchess of Vendôme turned out to be the best option. Everyone envied her after she gave birth to a frighteningly intelligent heir. Sometimes they'd hear rumors about the Duchess of the Eastern Empire. At first, Sabira thought it had nothing to do with her. She had no reason to compete with her until one specific moment. On one of those days, she was absolutely furious and ready to tear everything apart. The guy was begging her for forgiveness, saying he'd spend the rest of his life with her. That night, she found out her husband was a total piece of garbage. He brought a kid into the house, a kid he'd had with someone else. They were trying to pressure her into bonding with this child. Roxar assured her that even her brother and father couldn't say a thing. Sabira knew that perfectly well, but she couldn't do anything about it. She said he was born with that burden, and he couldn't change it. The guy just stared right through her and said she hadn't lost her touch. Sabira was supposed to be perfect, and she wasn't about to screw it all up with a kid from outside the marriage. From then on, all that mattered to her was her son, Huntain, more perfect than anyone else. One day, she saw the kind of books he was reading and offered to lend a hand. She tried to make him the center of her world, but he wouldn't take her help. At first, he just seemed gifted, but over time, it started to get creepy. At his age, he should have been needing his parents' help. It wasn't just that he didn't need her help that bothered her. At some point, she realized something about him was starting to get under her skin. She tried so hard to be perfect, but ended up feeling belittled by her husband and rejected by her son. The woman sat alone, feeling like a total nobody. Nobody ever came to see her, until Alice showed up one day. She'd only heard about her in passing from other people, never actually met her. Her eyes went wide when she took her in. Standing right there was the Duchess, the one calling the shots in the middle of the war. Sabira couldn't figure out how she'd even gotten into the house. Alice admitted she'd heard some things about her while she was out on a mission. Sabira was shocked to hear that everyone was talking about her funk. Alice told her to listen up, hinting that she needed to get out more. She smiled and said that she could still take care of her, though. Sabira was totally lost. She had no clue what this weird woman was even talking about. It pissed her off that Alice was hinting she needed someone to take care of her, give her attention. Sabira broke down crying from the humiliation and asked how she could even say something like that. She chucked a mug at Alice and told her to get the hell out of her house. It was the first time in her life she'd ever let herself act like that. Even though she was a little jealous of Alice and her lifestyle, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She was so mad, for the first time ever, that her hands were shaking. Sabira just lost it right there, crying her eyes out, unable to handle things anymore. And that's when her strange encounters with Alice really started. Even though they tried to connect, they had absolutely nothing in common. Sabira was pretty sensitive, while Alice, on the other hand, was a rock. She was constantly freaked out that Huntain might get pushed out of Heron. Alice kept telling her to stop stressing over such dumb stuff. She reminded her that Duke Vendôme doesn't feel guilty around her, and he won't turn his back on Huntain. Alice thought things through with logic and reason, not feelings. Because of that, Sabira would sometimes blow up and demand some comforting words. She asked if she was really sure her sons wouldn't start fighting over who gets to be the heir. Sabira said they might even draw swords on each other. At some point, she realized she was just running her mouth. But it was too late. Alice calmly replied that they wouldn't make a decision like that without a really good reason. She was confident that her kids could make their own choices. She was totally detached about whether they succeeded or failed. Alice smirked and said Sabira could take out her anger on her, like old times. The woman replied that she had her reasons for acting that way back then. She was surprised when Alice said she should be thanking her. The woman told Sabira that she could have gone down a really bad path if she hadn't intervened. She was floored that Alice knew what she was planning. Alice said she came to her after hearing rumors and finding a goodbye letter. She came to help someone who was ready to check out of life. Sabira went silent, realizing that Alice knew everything about her even back then. She clutched the hem of her dress, trying to figure out what that woman was thinking. She was so chill, acting like she'd just shrugged off all the despair. It hit Sabira then. She wanted to be that strong too. From that moment on, Sabira's days dragged on, slow and painful. She was jealous of Alice and admired her, all while living the life of an aristocrat. She knew why people felt sorry for her, and she couldn't escape it. Every day, Sabira came back to the same thought. Someone like her could never understand Alice. Then one day, she caught wind of a rumor that Duke Exer had a kid out of wedlock. She couldn't believe Alice would pull something like that, knowing how tough it is to be an illegitimate child. The woman ran to her husband, unable to stomach hearing any more of that garbage. She burst into tears of rage when they told her it wasn't about her own, but Exer. Sabira didn't say a word, just slapped her husband hard across the face. The man stared at his wife, shocked. She was totally losing it. The woman froze, realizing she'd just resorted to violence for the first time ever. She'd always tried to keep it together before, but this time she just snapped. She decided she needed to get the full story from Alice, to know the real deal. Still, she felt trapped in this mansion, unable to stand up for herself. She prayed every day she'd show up, before she actually went through with it. Sabira expected to see that same smug look, but something was off. The woman looked at her friend holding the baby, a wave of worry washing over her. Alice covered her face, saying her daughter was really vulnerable. It was the first time Sabira had ever seen Alice so broken. She always thought the woman was superhuman, until she showed her weakness. Sabira figured nothing bothered her, but now it was different. That night, she seemed like the most vulnerable woman on the planet. She was eaten up with guilt for giving her daughter those blonde locks. Alice got weaker, giving all her love to that fragile kid. Sabira stroked Perian's cheeks and said that's what motherly love is. She teared up, talking about how she used to be a little girl loved so much by her mom. Perian was about to burst into tears, but still tried to say she wasn't Perian. She figured the woman was just upset and mistook her for the Duchess's daughter. Sabira said she wouldn't pry, and understood there's a reason for the secret. She just wanted to get across how much Alice loved her. Perian couldn't argue anymore, and just got lost in her memories. She remembered being told once that violet eyes are passed down from the mother. She smiled and said that love gets passed down through genes too. You gotta love someone so much you'd risk your life for them. Perian broke down crying, thinking about how much her mother loved her. She never even thought she was the one who changed her mom's life. She silently vowed to cherish what Alice wanted to protect so badly. Perian's spirit surged back, and she vowed to make everyone responsible pay. She thought of her mother, just asking her to watch over her. Even now, the Exer family still has no clue she's more than just a servant. Larian, Phoenix, even her own father, they all still think Perian's dead. She couldn't believe that even Sabira had figured out who she really was. The girl looked down, then decided to ask how she knew. Sabira chuckled warmly and asked if there even needed a reason. Perian was stunned that she'd been recognized for no reason at all. Sabira was someone who'd only seen her a couple of times when she was a baby. Even so, she recognized her before her own flesh and blood did. She waited forever in that tower, but her dreams of family turned out to be nothing. From now on, she only felt bitterness towards those whose attention she craved. Perian made herself a promise. She'd build her own damn future. Out of the blue, she announced she had a plan and told her to do exactly as she said. Peri stated that she'd already put in the work to create a plan for Madame Sabira's future. The woman told her not to worry about her, saying she didn't have any high hopes. She told her to get ready to escape and said she was ready to help. Sabira saw the surprise in her eyes and awkwardly mentioned her son. She said he was planning to wipe everyone out on the wedding day, anyone involved in the succession. He was planning to take out Sabira, Perian, her husband, and Duke Vander too. She couldn't help but remember the time he called all this a temporary distraction. Perianne was floored by the sheer scale of the scheme he was cooking up. Even though she already knew about it, she was torn on how to react. While she was treating Sabira, she was also keeping a close eye on Roxar. From the get-go, she knew her marriage was just a game for the inheritance. She finally admitted that she was already aware of Hontaine's dishonesty. The girl smiled and said she should have figured it out before she even got on the train. Now she realized that Madame Sabira knew about their whole plan. She decided to find out why she got on the train, knowing what they were up to. Perianne asked if she was still in love with Hontaine after all this. Looks like she caught the woman off guard with that sudden question. Sabira didn't say anything, just gave the girl a warm smile. Even without an answer, Perianne understood everything she needed to know. She knew Sabira would love her kid, even if they, really messed up. Perianne saw she wasn't expecting anything, but she still wasn't giving up. She had a hunch and told her not to worry. She smiled and promised to save her from the misery she was going through. The woman looked at the girl hopefully and asked if that was even possible. She stood up and asked if she knew anything about Hontaine. The second Perianne mentioned his good side, Sabira realized she had a plan. She backed up her story, saying he wasn't always the way he is now. Perry was thinking Roxar probably forced the creation of his own puppets. He was running some kind of experiment to make the perfect ruler. It all made her think that Hontaine was more human when he was a kid. Sabira suddenly mentioned that he acts like a normal kid around Perry. She smiled and said her observations were right on the money. That's why she was happy when Alice brought her along. It let her see Hontaine when he was just being a regular kid. She figured he might have been put through the same kind of stuff she was. If that's the case, then there's still a chance he could change. That same night, Hontaine came back to the bedroom and found his wife. He smirked and said it had been a long time since he'd seen anything like it. After a little playful back and forth, he said he needed to ask her something. He smiled and asked who she was planning on going to the banquet with in 3 days. Perianne looked confused and answered that she was going with her husband. He gave a fake smile, knowing what kind of trouble would brew if they showed up with different dates. She smiled, realizing her suspicions were being confirmed. He'd shown some pretty irrational behavior to her in the past. He picked her despite her personality, and now he's pulling a stunt like this. She hadn't really thought about it before. But now her memories were flooding back. Even though he got messed with, he was born with feelings. Roxar thought that was messed up and decided to fix it. He tried to change the kid, like he was some kind of screw-up. His system contained a serious cocktail of different stuff. He only showed her his soft side because she had some pull. Hontaine smirked and asked if she was bummed about being apart. She knew he was into her and didn't give the answer he wanted. The girl smiled and said she should find herself another date. She pointed out that there's no rule saying she has to show up with a hubby. Perianne got a kick out of seeing the disappointment on his face. Meanwhile, the train just kept on chugging through the sky. Juris had access to the train's central dispatch. She paused thoughtfully at the door, like she was about to do something. She knew her magic could mess up the train's engine. The girl knew it was a crime, but she needed to rattle Roxar's cage. The second she used her magic, the place lit up with a bright flash. Perry appeared behind her and said there was a protective spell on it. Juris spun around, startled, surprised someone else was there. Even though she failed, she still wasn't willing to just let things be. This time, she unleashed even more magic, thinking it would do the trick. The next second, she realized she'd accidentally gone overboard with the magic. She'd be in deep trouble if anyone found out what she'd done. Imagine her surprise when she turned around and saw Perry, all busted up. She hadn't seen who was coming into the room, so she just attacked blindly. Scared, she rushed over to the girl and dropped to her knees beside her. Perry barely managed to ask why she'd suddenly jumped her like that. She somehow got to her feet, saying that was a pretty rough welcome. Perry looked way too good for someone who'd just taken that kind of beating. Juris couldn't believe her eyes when she saw her standing. After that, they went to Juris's room to hear Perry's story. "So, you're just gonna come right out and ask who I am, huh? Guess that attack didn't faze me. Fair enough. But I'm gonna flip that question back at you. What's with the sudden appearance? Looks like we're both holding on to secrets we're not exactly thrilled to share. I noticed something was off about you way back when we were working in the duchy. I did some digging. Turns out all that money Juris made? It didn't end up in the Western Empire. Plus, I know Hontaine's type. Goes all the way back to that fake princess incident. I used to ignore it, figured you had your reasons. Thought it wasn't my business. But now, everything's changed. You floored me when you asked if I wanted Roxana taken care of. Seriously? And then there was this one little thing that made me see you in a whole new light. She never used to say anything good about Han Tae-eun. Then, out of nowhere, she suddenly got hired. From that moment on, Perian started keeping a close eye on her. She often noticed the hatred in her eyes when she looked at Roxar. Her gaze was just serious and ice-cold. Perian was stunned the first time she saw her react like that. She figured there might be some old beef she didn't know about. After that, she tried to figure out Juris's backstory. That's how she uncovered the reason for the deep-seated animosity toward Roxar. She asked if her parents were secret operatives working for the Western Empire's tower. Juris felt totally caught off guard that Peri knew about her parents. They were investigating corruption and Roxar's experiments too. That's how they figured out the experiments were connected to the Eastern Empire's tower. They made it to the tower where Peri was, but Roxar took them out. Peri couldn't help but think they would have been safe if they'd found her back then. She calmed herself down, knowing she couldn't change what happened. Perian confessed that she shares her goal of taking down Roxar. After a short silence, she suggested Juris become allies. Looks like the girl still doesn't quite trust her friend. She knew Perian might not understand her, but she still didn't know anything about her. Juris jumped up and started firing off the questions that had been eating at her. She wanted to know why they needed her help if she was so damn powerful. Juris grabbed the girl roughly by the shoulders, like she was trying to shake the truth out of her. She asked if she was seriously pretending this was some kind of negotiation. The girl demanded to know how she managed to fool everyone, not giving a damn about what they were going through. She clenched her fists and asked bitterly what they even meant to her. Juris stared into her eyes and demanded an explanation for why she kept her real identity a secret. Back then, Peri didn't really need Elberry's help, but she still revealed who she really was. The girl answered simply that it was all because of her violet eyes. She recalled Elberry's words about how the eye color gets passed down from mother to daughter. She got up from the couch and said she wanted to avenge her mom. Perian smiled sweetly and said they were true friends. Even though she didn't know Juris's intentions, she could see how genuinely worried she was. She didn't care what was going on inside them. They were still friends. She was ready to help Juris and offered to combine all their strength. Peri wanted to help ease the pain of losing her parents. Even though Juris was interested in her offer, she was still suspicious. She was shocked to learn that all the tower employees had been captured a long time ago. Perian started recalling details to make Juris believe her. She perfectly described the features of one of the people Juris was looking for. Juris realized for the first time that they weren't the only ones being hunted. Perian asked her again to join forces and stop fighting this battle alone. Juris demanded a guarantee that she'd personally get to make those responsible pay. She stood up and said she was willing to work together, if everything she'd been told was on the level. Juris stated she was ready to show her all the records her parents had left behind. Using magic, she showed her everything they left behind before they died. Mostly it was just accounting books and invoices. But there was also data about the activities that were going on in Roxar's territory. They even managed to gather materials from the tower where they were studying monsters. Perian felt her head spinning with all this messed up information. Juris hinted that she could really use some intel from her, too. She asked how she ended up hating Roxar as much as she did. Peri was still having a hard time talking about her old life. She got flustered, but decided to finally come clean about who she really was. Juris cut her off and asked if she was actually Princess Perian. Peri didn't expect her to take it so calmly. At first, Juris was joking about it, until she realized it was legit. The next day, she decided to hold a meeting in the greenhouse. She gathered the few people who knew her secret around one table. Peri awkwardly announced that she was about to tell them everything she'd learned. She suggested we start with Hontaine, who was an experiment to create the perfect ruler. Roxar hid his identity, helping Sabira out instead of her busy husband. According to Juris's parents, he'd been researching the suppression of human emotions since he was young. Creating the perfect ruler had been his lifelong obsession. Sabira couldn't believe he dared use her son like that. Perian felt her heart clench seeing the woman so heartbroken. Sabira cut her off and asked, dead serious, what she was planning to do next. Peri glanced at Juris and gave a mysterious smile. After a short pause, she decided to share her plan to take down Roxar. What followed was a long explanation of her plans and why she was doing it. Her partners listened closely and were totally on board with her ideas. Even so, there were still some details that rubbed them the wrong way. Juris was floored when she realized her own brothers still didn't recognize her. Sabira backed her up, saying they were real pieces of work. Juris added that everyone was treating Perian like dirt. Perian remembered Huntain and mentioned he'd said something funny to her recently. She laughed, saying he'd ordered her to go to the banquet alone. They were shocked that the jerk would go to the ball with someone else. Juris stood up and said they weren't going to let him get away with that. She suggested wearing a dress so stunning, it'd blow everyone's minds. She showed her a bunch of dresses she'd been saving. Perian started feeling awkward and asked Sabira to cut it out. But the woman sided with Juris and pointed to a blue dress. Looks like she was on board with the girl's plan, even if Perian felt weird about it. They figured Huntain might not care, so they started thinking about a partner. Juris grinned and said all she had to do was blow everyone away with her partner. They exchanged a knowing look and unanimously picked a guy for the job. Perian, bless her heart, thought they were talking about Larian, who was on Huntain's level. Juris smiled and declared that Duke Pandurnian would be the perfect fit. Perian was so surprised. She didn't even catch who they were talking about at first. Sabira took off, said I needed to get in touch with him ASAP, before she could even argue. Pandurnian wasn't even on the cruise manifest, but that wasn't gonna stop him. The day arrived when he got another one of those rare messages from the Western Empire. He read through it carefully, and what he saw totally blew him away. The guy was floored that the Duchess was inviting him to a reception on the cruise. She also wrote that they'd be happy to have him as Perry's +1. He thought he was past being surprised by anything, but he was dead wrong. After a while, the day of the cruise banquet finally rolled around. Everyone was blown away by how over the top they managed to make the banquet. The aristocrats were all buzzing, saying the Vandams had outdone themselves again. The servant announced the arrival of Duke Huntain with a flourish. Every eye in the room instantly locked onto the power couple. Everyone was stunned to see him with another woman, someone who used to be in the running. They thought the bride was going to walk in with Duke Vendôme. Their chatter died down when they announced Lady Perry's arrival. To everyone's surprise, she was completely alone. Even though she held her head high, everyone saw it as a slap in the face from the groom. The aristocrats started thinking his behavior was pretty immature. They were shocked he'd ditch such a knockout bride like that. She looked so incredible. No one could take their eyes off her. The girl awkwardly realized that all eyes were indeed on her. To her surprise, their gazes weren't scornful, but rather sympathetic. She was glad, because this dress from Juris was more perfect than any other. This design harmonized perfectly with everything, and impressed with its color. One of the women shed a tear, believing that such a beautiful bride shouldn't be treated like dirt. She felt bad, because due to her position, she couldn't say a word to the groom. She didn't know that Perian had wandered off just because she was hungry. No sooner did the woman wish someone would resolve the situation than everything changed. Someone she never expected to see suddenly appeared in the banquet hall. The Exer family members themselves, from the Eastern Empire, had arrived at the banquet. Even though there was supposed to be a cultural exchange, the Eastern nobles took it as a major insult. Sabira stepped in, suggesting there might be some kind of misunderstanding. The woman explained that she personally invited these distinguished gentlemen. She glanced at the guard and ordered him to announce their arrival immediately. The guards announced the arrival of Duke Exer and Sir Phoenix. Perian couldn't believe that those two actually showed up. She'd heard Pandurnian was going to be invited, but she didn't fully believe it. Only later did she hear that the Exer family decided to fly to the train on dragons. They were surprised by the level of defensive magic the Vendômes had set up. Perian was so stunned by the whole scene, she was completely speechless. It blew her mind that these guys actually showed up where they weren't wanted. Phoenix threw his arms open, stoked, saying he hadn't seen Perry in ages. The girl just ignored his greeting and started looking around. Turns out, Pandurnian was busy buttering up Madame Sabira. Perry decided not to waste any time and walked over to Phoenix. She suggested they head out to the balcony for a private chat. She called them out for showing up so reckless and out of the blue. Phoenix tried to play it off, grinning and asking if she wasn't happy to see them. Perry ran her hand along the railing, saying that wasn't the point. She was expecting Phoenix, but she definitely didn't want to see Pandurnian. They had a really rough relationship, and she definitely said some things she regretted. Now she's in this awkward spot, having to ask him for a partnership. Phoenix was just stoked she was okay, and said he'd been worried sick about her. He was sweating bullets that Lyrion would cause her more problems. Perry smiled and said everything was cool, since nothing bad had happened yet. Felix breathed a sigh of relief and said he was glad to hear her say that. He couldn't stop grinning, telling her he'd started talking to his dad more. Perian couldn't figure out why he thought any of that was thanks to her. He remembered how she asked Riso to guarantee the Holy Kingdom's trade autonomy. He explained how he shut down the deal that would have let everyone freely use her homeland's airspace. Perian was blown away that the Duke actually kept his word. Phoenix said he came all the way here just to break the news himself. Perian awkwardly asked why Pandurnian even accepted the invite. Phoenix smirked mysteriously and asked if she didn't already know. He figured it was too late to say why, but decided to spill anyway. He'd always hoped things would work out between Perry and his younger brother. He said he felt really bad that she got mixed up with the Vendhams. After a short pause, she asked if he still saw her as Lady Perian. The second she asked that, he went silent, like it meant something big. He asked, confused, why he'd even be thinking about that kind of stuff anymore. Perry was asking why he even wanted to set her up with the Duke in the first place. He was remembering how his family adopted Pandurnian just for a marriage arrangement. They figured Perry might still be a sore spot for him, something he hadn't gotten over. Phoenix wanted to tell him to let Perry go and follow his own damn heart, but he couldn't exactly say that out loud. Perry was still shocked at how blunt he was being. He went on about how he could become her brother-in-law if things worked out between them. Pandurnian, furious, threw open the balcony doors and demanded to know what they were talking about. He basically told Phoenix to cut the crap and stop talking nonsense. As soon as they were alone, Pandurnian just let out a tired sigh. Perry tried to ease the tension, pointing out that they seemed to have a good relationship. Pandurnian shot back that he was just getting hassled, and only from one side. The second he finished that sentence, you could hear a pin drop. She decided to change the subject before he started bringing up old history. Perry asked him what made him come all this way anyway. He just sneered and said he came to see her begging for help with this marriage. He reminded her that he'd warned her before about how her future situation was a pipe dream. Perry knew he'd come to salvage her reputation, even if he was chewing her out now. She smiled, because he was still putting on an act. He was already playing with fire when he decided to get involved with a maid. On top of that, he dragged a wyvern along, which could also start tongues wagging. Perian went beet red, trying to figure out why he was pushing things so far. She remembered Phoenix saying he was keeping his distance on purpose, even though he liked her. Those thoughts just made Perian blush even harder. She mentally kicked herself, since she figured they wouldn't even see each other again. Perian was stuck on that thought until she finally looked up. She spotted a couple hanging out on the balcony one floor up. Turns out, Hauntain was having a real cozy chat with some chick. He knew Perian was around, but he was still putting on this whole show with the girl. Perian wondered if he was deliberately trying to make her jealous. Pandurnian put a hand on her shoulder and asked if that couple was bothering her. Perian recoiled, totally flustered, and insisted that wasn't the case. The second she got near the railing, Pandurnian's hand landed right on her waist. Turns out, he was just turning her so she wouldn't have to look at Hauntain. She said again she was fine, since she knew she was going to get dumped anyway. Perian said she was only putting up with this so she could get her revenge on him someday. Out of nowhere, Pandurnian suggested she ditch him first, before he could do it to her. Perry, surprised, asked him how exactly she was supposed to pull that off. Pandurnian said it was easy, then offered himself as a tool to do it. He stared into her eyes, all fired up, and suggested they, get back at Hauntain together. The girl was floored that he'd actually suggest something like that. She took it as a joke and laughed it off, saying she was fine. Perry chimed in that they weren't even married yet, so it didn't even count as cheating. He stroked her cheek and smirked, calling it a little fling. Right after that, he just went for her lips, not letting her get a word in. Perry thought he was just messing around, but he actually kissed her. A few seconds later, she pushed him away and turned away, totally flustered. She asked him what he thought he was doing and said she thought it was all a joke. The girl turned her head and saw that Hauntain had been watching the whole thing. Just like she figured, he was just acting like he didn't care. She didn't get why he was so pissed, since he was the one who wanted to dump her. Pandurnian smirked, asking what it was like to cheat on Hauntain with him. Perry said playfully, she didn't know he had that kind of joke in him. She added that the kiss wasn't as bad as she thought it would be. Right after that, Hauntain stormed over to get her. Pandurnian said he looked forward to seeing her again soon. He crossed his arms with a playful grin and called her Lady Vendôme. Pandurnian was deliberately trying to get under Hauntain's skin implying his wife wasn't really his. The guy got so ticked off he yanked Perry's arm like super hard. She told him to slow down and that it hurt, but he wasn't listening. Perry tried to get through to him, but he was already burning up with jealousy and rage. She was pissed that this jerk was acting like this, especially after he'd been ignoring her. She thought he'd blow off the kiss, but his reaction screamed jealousy. After that, he sat her down on the bed and backed off, like a disapproving dad. Perry noticed her arm was throbbing pretty bad from where he'd yanked her. Her body wasn't usually this weak, but everything changed a couple days ago. That day, she told him she'd taken the artifact from the fake, and then it vanished. She explained that the light went through her body, like something got absorbed. Mello knew a powerful object like that probably wouldn't activate for no reason. He asked her to check if there were any issues with her powers. Perry decided to push herself and try to summon more black dolls. After crafting the dolls, she started arranging them into position. The next second, she noticed something that gave her a jolt. She was surprised to find it was getting harder to control them. It felt like the balance of her powers was off somehow. Perry was taken aback that the artifact's energy was messing with her body like this. From that moment on, the balance her body was used to was totally thrown off. On top of that, she couldn't draw power from the earth since she was up in the sky. She also blamed Hantain. That jerk grabbed her hand way too hard. After a while, he finally decided to grace her with his words. Hantain turned around and asked what she was doing on the terrace with the Duke. He smirked and asked why she hadn't considered just not doing stupid stuff. Perry turned away, saying he started this whole mess in the first place. He said she used to never have guests, and now she's entertaining other guys too. Hantain touched her hair and asked how much longer he had to put up with her. He stepped closer, menacingly, telling her she wasn't a princess anymore. He asked if she really thought he didn't know her secret. Perry realized he'd known all along just how deeply she'd planned everything. Back at the academy, he couldn't not recognize her, since she was the only one who got a rise out of him. She'd anticipated this, but didn't think he'd be the one to bring it up first. She figured he'd save that ace in the hole for a more critical moment. She said she was just surprised to hear that name after all this time. Hantain smirked, pointing out that even her own family didn't recognize her. He dramatically called her Poor Lady Perrion. Hantain asked if it stung that her brothers didn't recognize her. He openly mocked that they'd been around her for months and still didn't have a clue. Perry fired back, asking if he knew everything about Roxar. She confidently stated that his unique nature was all his uncle's doing. He asked if she really thought that poor kid was just an innocent victim of some experiment. Hantain knew that in her eyes, Roxar was the bad guy. Perrion was taken aback by his reaction and asked if that was true. Hantain agreed with her, but Roxar had admitted what he'd done from the start. He called his birth an honor and begged him to become the perfect monarch. In that moment, Hantain neither forgave nor punished him. To some extent, he even agreed with his ideal and decided to embody it. He believed that all problems started with fools who were in positions they didn't deserve. Hantain asked if she was curious to see a world where order was maintained. She replied that she wasn't in a position to talk about ideals. Hantain knew that nothing would change just because she knew the truth. He said that he was Vendom, while she was just some girl from the Holy Kingdom. The man smiled and implied that she couldn't possibly influence the situation. Perrion called him an ideal monarch, dripping with sarcasm, like he could actually reach perfection. She pointed out that his perfect control was crumbling right in front of her. The girl smirked and said he was just a defective model. She reminded him that when you're building the perfect human, any outlier is a failure. She suggested he get his own house in order before lecturing the world. Hantain put his hand on her head and said he really only felt emotions through her. He added that she was the only one in this world who could really get under his skin. The man stated that she better not push his buttons if she knew what was good for her. He said that in this situation, the best they could do was avoid going to war. Perry agreed to drop the argument and demanded he promise her something. She said she didn't want Roxar to know who she really was. Hantain said it wasn't a big deal, but still asked why he should do it. Perrion smirked and was about to threaten him with the same, but he immediately agreed. He only promised after she promised him she wouldn't cheat on him. The moment he heard that, he winced like she'd said something totally ridiculous. Even so, he kept his word and didn't tell Roxar anything. He knew he was planning to get rid of her at the wedding and didn't see her as a threat. Because of that, she could freely discuss future plans with Juris and Sabira. Finally, the cruise train arrived on the island called the Emperor's Cradle. Perian was blown away when she saw that castle floating in the sky. She already knew her wedding was going to be held on his turf. On top of that, she remembered her time was running out. This place was one of the most famous spots in the world. It was popular because the first emperor of the West declared the nation's founding right here. The island still held a relic left behind by the founder. The writing said the emperor should approach the sword if the empire was ever in turmoil. Nowadays, sailing the seas become impossible because of the monsters. That just made the island even more mysterious and boosted the imperial family's status. Now everyone was blown away by how many people they'd exiled to the island. These people just lived their normal lives or worked on construction projects. The princess glared at them, hating them for destroying this legendary place. She knew it meant nothing to them, just like the emperor, who nobody respected. Alo felt rage boiling inside her as she looked at the island. She often wondered how much more humiliation she would have to endure. She turned and learned that the emperor had been assigned quarters on the island. They added that a spot had been prepared for her in the watchtower. She immediately understood their scheme and gave a bitter smirk. After that, she ordered them to take her to the watchtower. Meanwhile, Peri waited for Juris in Lady Sabira's room. As soon as the girl entered the room, she noticed her odd state. Juris trudged wearily over to the girl and told her she was still in one piece, for now. Peri held out a towel to her, and then Juris decided to ask a question. She asked why her husband was planning to off the Vendham couple specifically during the wedding. Perian guessed that he just needed a solid excuse. She figured he probably wouldn't put on this kind of spectacle if all he wanted was to become Duke. He'll have the right to take decisive action for revenge if all his loved ones are gone. She didn't know which faction was giving him trouble, but she knew for sure this was a good pretext. Peri also suggested that people might actually sympathize with him given the circumstances. Juris listened carefully, but there was still something she couldn't wrap her head around. She figured he must have been pretending to care about her, considering his whole scheme. Juris couldn't shake how out of line he'd been acting at the banquet. Peri figured he probably had his reasons, considering how she'd been acting. She decided to wrap up the conversation and thanked her for the help. Thanks to her, they managed to finish some crucial prep, and now it was her turn to move. Just then, Sabira Savior showed up. She gave Juris a serious dressing down about his behavior and said she'd lend her a dress. The woman grabbed her briefcase and said she'd brought something with her. She pulled out a can of baby formula from her bag, the one Peri had asked for. The girl grinned, happy, and thanked her for the help. Juris was taken aback. Seeing the can of baby formula, she wanted to know right away what was in it for her. Meanwhile, Alu was spending another freezing night in the tower. She was totally blown away when she saw the inside. It freaked her out how they recreated everything with such sickening accuracy. Inside, it was exactly the same as that guard tower where Roxar exiled them. Sometimes she'd climb to the roof, where she could get a good view of the Imperial Palace. All they could do was watch the Vendham faction throw their party. That was a time when she cursed everything under the sun just to survive. On those nights, she felt like she had nothing left to believe in, until someone's kindness showed up at her bedside. She noticed that the person who came always smelled like powdered milk. Alo kept racking her brain, wondering why that guy stopped visiting them. She couldn't help but flash back to when she was in the exact same boat. Alo caught a whiff of that powdered milk smell again. Just like in the tower, the girl froze solid when it hit her. Could that guy be back? She stopped dead right before the stairs and saw his long shadow. She'd run into him once before, almost 2 years ago, when she was locked up. That day, she'd suddenly woken up at dawn and realized someone was on the roof. She bolted up to the roof like a shot the second it clicked. The princess had a ton of questions she was dying to ask. She felt a wave of despair wash over her when she realized he was slipping away again. The girl begged the shadow to stop, just to escape her loneliness for a moment. Luckily, the figure actually froze, and she managed to ask a question. Alo asked who she even was and why she kept coming to her. She had on the same clothes and the same scent as all those other times. Standing in front of her was definitely the same person as 2 years ago. Before, she couldn't even imagine who was visiting her. The girl smirked and turned around, saying she'd tell her all about it. She hid her face with a hat and said her name was Red, and she was here to help the kids. Alo remembered the only person who'd ever spout that kind of nonsense. Back then, this same girl said the same thing and vanished, like she was just a figment of her imagination. She doubted anyone could actually get past the emperor's guard. Eventually, Alo started thinking the girl and the food were just a figment of her imagination. Then she squeezed the candy jar and decided, with conviction, that this guy was for real. Now, she vowed again to find out who this person really was. Perry quoted a line from a play she'd first seen with His Majesty. It was about heroes saving kids named Red and Blue. Watching that play, she learned that grown-ups are the ones who protect people. She hoped the princess would feel that too, but all she did was call her crazy. Alo asked if she was just swept up in the idea of helping some poor princess. She wondered if she was hoping for a reward when the tables turned. The girl remembered she'd shown up uninvited, and then just vanished. Alo snapped, furious, demanding to know why she was back. Perry smiled. Figuring it was no surprise, Alo took it as a taunt. 2 years ago, even she didn't know how she'd let Alo see her. The girl couldn't understand her own feelings, because she could have hidden, but didn't. At some point, she realized she'd felt love when Maman saved her. She was able to love this world again, just because Maman existed. Perry realized a person can get through tough times just knowing someone else is there. That's exactly why she wanted to show Alo that someone had her back. This time, she wasn't there for some vague show of support, and decided to lay out her plan. She spun around and said she was there to make her a serious offer. She said it pained her to see how messed up the world was. Alao was shocked that she had the nerve to suggest a partnership. Perry smirked and said she'd help her become empress. She tried to prove that Alao's life wasn't set in stone, and she could still change things. The former princess's life had been so bleak, she hadn't considered something like that in ages. From that point on, the days marched on relentlessly until the wedding day arrived. Even the bright sun seemed to signal that everything was about to change. Dressed-up nobles were making their grand entrance into the banquet hall. At that very moment, the bride and groom were getting ready to tie the knot. Phoenix was about to burst into tears when he saw the magnificent Perry. Sabira had already taken her place and was watching the ceremony with tense anticipation. The priest began to prepare them for their vows. Perian was sick of hearing endless talk about obeying Hauntain. From the very start, they'd been drilling it into her head that she had to listen to and serve her husband. As soon as his vow speech was over, they were told to kiss. Perry glanced at her husband, realizing they were reaching the climax. Hauntain gently placed his hand on her waist and decided to feel things out. He asked if there was someone else she would have rather gone through with this whole thing with. Perian froze in surprise, not understanding what he was getting at. Hauntain didn't say a word. He just grabbed her and laid a kiss on her that left no room for argument. From that moment on, their marriage was considered sealed. Hauntain pulled back gently and said they were bound together now. He said he'd hoped she could make a difference, but she'd already failed. He loved reminding her of the loss she'd already suffered in his eyes. Little did he know, Perian had something prepared that would change everything. The next thing everyone knew, the ground was shaking beneath their feet. Weird tentacles burst through the floor just when he thought he had it all locked up. Phoenix shielded Pandurnian and started racking his brain, trying to figure out where they came from. They were beyond shocked when they saw a giant kraken. Just then, Alo walked up to them, holding the imperial sword. Every member of the Vendom family froze, completely confused about what was going on. Roxar couldn't figure out where the monster came from, and now the princess had the sword. He stepped forward and asked her to put the sword down, trying to get things back under control. He figured the sword must have come loose because the ground cracked open. The nobles started whispering about how no one had ever been able to pull it out before. He demanded they put a lid on these power grabs, taking advantage of the emperor being so young. Perian knew from the start he'd try to stop the princess. She realized his words sounded pretty convincing to everyone else. With that kraken showing up, a lot of people might think the earthquake pulled the sword out. The princess had to solve this problem to solidify her power. Perry herself was getting curious about how exactly she'd handle this. She stood back and watched the whole thing, like she was just an observer. It made her happy to see how determined Alo looked at the guy who wronged her. Just one look from her made you believe she could pull it off. Perian smiled when she realized Alo recognized her, even with the disguise. That recent encounter was a lot different than the one 2 years ago. Back then, they were total strangers. But now Alo knew her as his bride. She didn't reveal Red's identity, showing that she trusted Perry. Just the thought of that made the girl smile happily. With just one smile, she showed me that all it takes is faith to turn your life around. The princess realized, once and for all, that the strange one was Perian. She was starting to suspect that the island's destruction was part of Parian's plan too. Parian was the only one who'd offered her a helping hand this whole time. She decided to trust Parian's crazy idea and swung her sword. The girl pointed it at Roxar and said she could clearly see who he really was. Roxar couldn't believe she'd actually go against him. She kept the sword steady and told him his face was full of nasty corruption. Alo declared herself the one chosen by the Emperor's sword, then accused him of a crime. She said he dared to deceive everyone and act like he was in charge, then plunged the sword into the ground. After that, the whole island started shaking like crazy. The nobles saw the wreckage starting to float up into the air. It meant the shattered ground was going back to the way it was before. The people around started cheering as soon as they saw this miracle straight out of the scriptures. They had no clue Parian was the one who moved the land. She still hadn't fully recovered her strength, but she had to see this through. Meanwhile, the doors of the flying train started to slide open, and bodies started tumbling out of them in some seriously messed up way. The nobles spun around right away and saw this freak show. They started screaming in terror, trying to figure out what the heck was going on. Bodies started dropping onto the island, and they scattered like cockroaches. After a while, they realized these weren't people falling, but figures made of earth. One of the guys turned around and said they looked familiar to him. They looked like those imperial supporters who went missing. The aristocrats immediately turned to Roxar, like they were demanding answers from him. The princess pointed a finger at him and asked if he was the one who hurt them. The guy couldn't figure out why these figures he'd dealt with long ago were showing up here. He couldn't help but remember Lady Parian's ability to create earthen bodies. He instantly connected that to how much she resembled Hontain's bride. That's how he figured out the bride was the real Exer. He couldn't figure out how she was staying hidden and decided to rat her out to Hontain. He watched her from afar, realizing she was seriously dangerous. Roxar clearly had no clue that Hontain had jumped ship a long time ago. He dropped to his knees, realizing Hontain already knew about Perry before anyone else. It stung that he hadn't spilled the beans to anyone, including himself. Before you knew it, the whole change of power thing was taken care of quick. Nobody could protect Roxar after bodies of the missing started raining down from the sky. The princess declared that the marriage was against the will of the heavens. She triumphantly announced herself as the new ruler and canceled their marriage. After that, she ordered Roxar to be put on trial. Looks like the guy's finally made peace with his fate. He knew he couldn't change anything, and Hontain wasn't gonna save him. The judge stared him down, asking if he pleaded guilty. That question hung over his head like a ticking time bomb. He felt all those eyes on his back and choked up, unable to answer. Sabira and Hontain just stood back, cool as cucumbers, waiting for the verdict. Roxar said he owned up to all his wrongdoings and was ready to face the music. They asked him if he was taking orders from the Vendams. He said he did it all himself and hoped it wouldn't reflect badly on Lord Hontain. Perry realized he was going to take the fall for everything. It felt right, seeing as he really did handle everything. He asked for permission to say goodbye to his master before leaving. He dropped to his knees in front of Hontain, saying it was an honor to serve him. Roxar wished he'd stay put and enjoy all the perks. Perry felt disgusted when he bowed his head and kissed his shoe. She couldn't let it all end like this, no way. She waited until they dragged him off to the warehouse in the island's dungeon. Roxar sat in his cell, not believing how things had turned out. He grinned like a maniac and said his idea would live on. The guy comforted himself with the hope that his master would bring it to life. Talk about a shock! All of a sudden, these lady hands popped right out of the wall. They pinned him good, squeezing the air right out of him, scared him half to death. She tossed him on the floor, saying she almost forgot about his little look-alike doll. Perry knew that prison would be way too easy on Roxar, so she figured she'd snatch him and hand him over to the Holy Kingdom for questioning. Now all that was left was to deal with Hontain himself. After visiting Roxar, the girl quietly slipped back into her room. She found Hontain sitting at the table, reading a book. He greeted her with a smile, casually mentioning she was back early today. Parian was furious that this creep could stay so calm and collected. She decided to mess with him and froze in the doorway. The guy was stunned when she called him dear husband. She smirked, remembering they were strangers now. Parian asked how he was feeling now that his power was cut in half. He said she already knew he didn't give a damn who won. Hontain stepped closer and said he'd learned something new. He asked if she knew why Roxar kissed his shoe. He chuckled when she called him a freak and said that wasn't the reason. Turns out, he did it to transfer his memories to him. Perian remembered that was one of Roxar's major scientific achievements. It all started with making Hontaine into the perfect guy. She felt a jolt of fear when she started to suspect what he might know. Hontaine, read her mind and smirked, saying he knew everything. He brought up what they did to her in that tower, all the experiments they ran. He asked if that was why she was so insistent on keeping her identity secret. Hontaine dramatically called her poor Princess Perian, the one who got a raw deal. He stroked her cheek and said he really ought to thank her for all this. Perian knew he was just trying to get under her skin with those words. She snuggled closer, thinking she'd already moved past all that. Perian was sure she could cut him way deeper than he ever could her. She looked him dead in the eye and asked if it turned him on that their bodies were linked like this. He was shocked she figured out he was secretly into it. She smirked and said that part wasn't her real flesh anyway. Perian laughed and told him he wasn't anything special to her. She didn't care who was in his place, but he only felt special when he was with her. She stroked his ears and said he was such a sad little thing. Peri was toying with him, saying he'd never experience anything like this with anyone else. She stood on her tiptoes and said she'd give him a whole new world. With just one kiss, Perian made his body obey her completely. He tried to resist, knowing it was just a manipulation tactic. Before he knew it, his hand was lost in her hair. Hontaine didn't want this sweet kiss to end, and closed his eyes. As soon as she pulled away, he breathed her name like he was starving for it. The next second, he froze, like he'd been burned, and asked what she was thinking. He didn't even realize when he'd gotten so weak, he collapsed on the floor. He had no idea that even their kiss was part of Perian's scheme. The girl wiped her lips and remarked that everything worked out perfectly. She smirked, tasting blood in her mouth. That's how she managed to break the spell, suppressing Hontaine's emotions. After that, she slung his arm over her shoulders and dragged him to the bed. Hontaine was just someone whose humanity got crushed by the monster byproducts. She stirred something in him, got him all worked up, and then fed him her blood. Him passing out cold just proves everything went according to plan. Now all that's left is to wait for him to wake up and see the world with new eyes. Perian actually pulled it off. She kept her promise to save Hontaine's life. She was stoked she could help someone who had helped her. She knew that from now on, the future relationship between mother and son was in their hands. Perian happily ran out onto the balcony and decided it was time for her to bounce. She managed to complete all the missions she had planned for this trip. Peri managed to take down Roxar and hand him over to the Holy Kingdom. She was convinced this would kick off a whole new era for the Western Empire. Ala West reclaiming the throne? That's gonna be legendary. Perian was cool with her spy games staying under wraps. She cracked a happy smile, soaking in the perks of the job. She was a deep cover agent, always working in the shadows. Peri got into this in the first place because she couldn't exactly be herself out in the open. As a covert operative, she pulled off some seriously major moves. Besides that, she'd flipped the script on the continent's destiny more times than she could count. She knew this gig would seriously shake up the balance of power, too. Perian was loving how awesome and sharp she was. She climbed onto the railing, deciding it was time for the spy to quietly disappear. She froze, one step away from falling off the train, and mentally said goodbye to everyone. Perian plummeted down, silently hoping they wouldn't meet again in the next life. Meanwhile, Hontaine was still sound asleep in his bed. He was dreaming about an event that happened a long, long time ago. He remembered what happened on the 10th day after he was born. That's when he first realized who he was, where he was, and what kind of family he was born into. He received memories that he definitely shouldn't have. That's when he heard that his uncle had made some questionable advancements in engineering and the arts. Roxar was arguing that they should be running the empire, not the emperor's family. Hontaine let out a tired breath, realizing Roxar had transferred a dead man's memories to him. Even though he got Mask's memories, Hontaine was born with his own separate personality. Hontaine was less than a year old, but even then, he was an adult in a baby's body. He decided to stop dwelling on his own identity and just wait for his body to grow up. A year later, Roxar came back home after a mission for the emperor. He collapsed to his knees, called Hontaine Mask, and started begging for forgiveness. He pleaded for pardon for not being able to serve him from the very beginning. Roxar was sobbing, promising to dedicate this life to him and him alone. Hontaine watched this like it was some crazy scene from a movie. Roxar's desperate appearance didn't stir any feelings in him at all. He acted as normal as possible and took his time, trying not to stand out. Before long, even he had a moment worth remembering. It first happened when Alice showed up with her daughter. Sabira introduced him to Lady Perry from the Eastern Empire and told him to say hello. He reached out and saw a creature that couldn't even speak properly. He examined her like some kind of object, realizing he was holding a real child. The boy watched the little girl and realized she wasn't like him. He thoughtfully admitted that he didn't even know how to handle her. Sabira was genuinely happy to hear something like that from her son. She said that with time, this cutie would grow into a beautiful lady. Huntain glanced at her again and realized that this kid was actually kinda cute. He couldn't even figure out why he was feeling that way. Before long, she'd grown up a lot and even started talking to him. One day, he heard her talking about a kraken and asked who she had a crush on. The girl suddenly announced that she liked someone named Pani. Huntain tried to find out who she was talking about, but he couldn't get a straight answer. The girl pointed her finger and said that Honi is Honi. He felt a surge of annoyance when he realized she was calling someone else Pani. In that moment, he realized that he was feeling irritated for the first time. Roxar watched all this, realizing that Huntain was becoming unhinged. He knew it had something to do with the princess, and he was going to change everything. That's when Huntain started realizing he was only changing when Perian was around. The second he started wondering why, Roxar was back on his knees again. He was trying to drill it into his head, again, that he should be ruling this world. Roxar was practically begging him to make a decision for the sake of the grand plan. That's when he pitched him this experiment to become even more enhanced. Roxar laid it all out, the good, the bad, everything, no holding back. Huntain didn't give a damn about serving any so-called grand purpose. Even so, he still went along with Roxar's offer. Even he couldn't figure out why he made that choice at that moment. All he remembered was getting annoyed over some little thing. A lot of time had passed since then, and he was starting to grow up. Even the feelings he had for Perian faded over time. At some point, he realized that even her mother's death didn't stir anything in him. He wasn't even that bothered by her being locked up in that tower. Right around then, Roxar's experiment was making some serious progress. He was using the materials he got to run all kinds of enhancement procedures. During the experiment, he got even better at cutting out personal feelings. He was slowly turning into a perfect, rational machine. Even though the experiment was a success, it was a seriously boring time. He didn't feel joy or purpose in anything anymore. Huntain was numb, and the whole world seemed drained of color. That is, until he spotted a girl at the academy. The second he saw her, he knew it was Perian. He remembered how she cried when she almost got kicked out. In that moment, he felt something inside him start to really warm up. It was an uncontrollable feeling of elation, and only she could trigger it. He tried to figure out why, thinking it was a side effect of the experiment. Huntain figured it was just a temporary blip. He stopped dwelling on it, since his time at the academy was coming to an end. Back then, he had no clue that one day he'd open his eyes and actually feel something. It was the first time he'd ever felt his body flooded with these totally unknown sensations. Huntain was hit with this crushing feeling of defeat and shame, knowing she was calling all the shots. He thought it was impossible, but she actually managed to unlock his emotions. Just like that, the plan Roxar dedicated his entire life to went down the drain. Even so, Huntain was starting to realize things weren't exactly terrible for him. Before, all the feelings Perry stirred up in him felt suffocating and irritating. Now, every little thing she did just seemed cute and endearing. For the first time, he understood he should have been gentler, cherished her, spoiled her rotten. That's why Huntain started getting pissed at Roxar for creating such a blockhead. He got out of bed, promising himself he'd treat her right from now on. Huntain knew she'd been having a rough time because of his screw-ups. Even so, he still wanted to make her even happier. The last person he expected to see when he was thinking that was his mom. Seeing her, it hit him that she'd been worried about him this whole time, too. The next thing he knew, she looked like she was about to collapse. He saw the desperation on her face and had to know what was going on. Something twisted inside him when she told him Perry had just passed. The guy was just starting to turn things around, but his hopes just went up in smoke. He ran downstairs right away to see his bride's body. They tried to stop him, but he ordered them to get out of his way. The servant sadly looked away and backed away from the massive door. After that, Huntain was met by doctors standing around Perry's body. They decided to leave them alone and said they'd wait outside. With a trembling hand, Huntain pulled off the sheet and saw her body covered in blood. He couldn't understand how someone who was just fine could end up like this. Based on his memories, he figured this might not be the real body. Still, he couldn't shake the thought that she really could be gone. His hands shook at the thought that she taught him how to feel, and then just up and kicked the bucket. He tried to understand his feelings, but tears just started streaming from his eyes. The guy just stood there, legs locked, silently mourning his bride's body. Word soon reached the Exer family itself, including the brothers. Phoenix couldn't believe his ears when he heard she jumped off the train. He refused to believe it was an accident, right to the very end. Phoenix bolted, like he was trying to outrun the harsh truth. Perian was the kind of woman who could tough out anything, no matter how bad. He approached the spot that was stained with her blood. Just by looking at it, he knew the wound was serious. He was heartbroken by how tragic her life turned out to be. Phoenix didn't know who she really was, and figured this was all forced on her. Even on her wedding day, it looked like she was suffering because of those guys. She was always the one looking out for everyone else, no matter how tough things got. He actually wanted her to marry Pandorinian and become part of the Exer family? That just goes to show how much he liked her as a person. It hit the guy hard that he couldn't protect her this time either. He couldn't even protect Perian back when she was exiled as a baby. He swore he'd become a brother she could be proud of, if she ever came back. Phoenix trained like crazy, promising he'd protect his sister. He dumped that fake because she wasn't who he thought she was. He couldn't even protect Perian, who reminded him so much of his sister. Phoenix was shaking, feeling how weak and worthless he was. He covered his face with his hands and thought that Perian herself was long gone too. The man thought about his mom and his little sister Perian again. Everyone he cared about was gone, and he couldn't protect anyone. He couldn't figure out why they still praised him as the best knight. Meanwhile, the tragic news reached Pandorinian as well. He stopped just a few feet from the room where Perian's body lay. He watched the people thoughtfully from a distance, like he still didn't believe it. He couldn't confirm the death, since he was just a wedding guest. Pandorinian knew it would be best to leave, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Word on the street is Hauntain was glued to the bride's body for ages. Pandorinian just stood there, knowing Lady Peri was basically a stranger to him. There was no real progress or defining moment in their relationship. He used to think he could just shove aside the feelings he had for her. But now he gets it. He shouldn't have just stood by and watched. He figures if he'd just taken her away back then, her cold body wouldn't be lying in that building now. Pandorinian felt like total garbage for not doing a damn thing for her. He froze, feeling like he was standing in front of that tower all over again. The guy squeezed his eyes shut, not understanding why he's only realizing this after losing her. Meanwhile, Sabira was chilling in a private room, waiting for Juris. Looks like the girl was just as blindsided by the news about her friend's death. She stared at her, totally shocked, and asked if she'd heard. Sabira squeezed her eyes shut and said she already knew. Juris still couldn't believe it could be true. She wanted to believe Peri had faked her death again, fooled everyone. Sabira agreed, since Peri's mission was a success. There was absolutely no reason for her to actually be gone. Juris smiled, realizing Sabira felt the same way. She clenched her fist, thinking about why Peri would fake her own demise. Juris broke down, not understanding why she hadn't told them anything beforehand. Sabira said sadly that she was just like her selfish mother. She squeezed the girl's hands and told her to believe she was still alive. They wiped away their tears, hoping they'd meet her again someday. Meanwhile, the servant decided to report the news to Larion. The moment he heard about her death, he smirked like he'd heard a joke. He turned away, surprised she'd met such an ignominious end. Larion figured her end wouldn't have been so pointless if she'd stayed in Exer. He grinned like a maniac and thought she could never replace Perian anyway. Larion remembered how happy he felt when he saw the fake's smile. At the same time, he wished all the kids who looked like Perian would just disappear. He figured this was the right way to end everything. He couldn't help but think back to the day he first saw Perian. Even though he was just a kid, he already had this feeling she could vanish too. He fell for her back then, when Perian was only a few months old. His brother Phoenix was in and out of her room every day just to see her. Even their dad gradually got attached to the kid he didn't even think was his. Still, Larion couldn't quite get on board with those feelings right away. He didn't get why their dad wouldn't just get rid of the kid with the questionable background. Before she was born, their family was perfect, a real solid unit. But after she showed up, a crack started to form between them. Even the vassals kept their mouths shut, only because Reso Exer acknowledged the girl. Despite his age, Larian knew this could be a real headache. That night, he went into her room for no real reason. He was curious to see the kid who was putting his family in a tight spot. The second he saw his sister, something inside him shifted. He checked her out and realized she was actually kinda cute. Still, he knew she was shaking things up in the Xer household. He was wrestling with some weird feelings, a battle between his heart and his head. He just stood there, watching this tiny little thing make noises. Larian heard her voice and wondered what was bugging her. He figured he'd touch her, just so her crying didn't cause any trouble. He saw the look in her eyes and guessed she'd start bawling at the sight of a stranger. But against all odds, the kid just let out a happy little squeak. Right then, he felt all the hate drain out of his messed up heart. He couldn't wrap his head around why this little girl was so happy to see someone who hated her. The boy carefully swaddled her and picked her up like she was made of gold. In that instant, he realized how messed up his thinking had been. He was holding this tiny thing, couldn't even wiggle on its own. She reached her little hands out to him, thinking he'd love her too. He silently called her a little dummy, someone who hadn't seen an ounce of darkness. Larian felt his heart pounding and held her head close to his. From that moment on, he wanted to protect her, to shield her from all the crap out there. Larian spent every day with her, showering her with love. He saw how pissed she got when Dad wouldn't play with her. He loved giving in to his little sister's wants and whims. Their mom was a knight in service, traveling all over the world. At the same time, their dad had to handle his duties as a duke, so raising the girl pretty much fell on their shoulders. One day they went for a walk, and Phoenix noticed Perry kept sucking on her fist. He'd read in a parenting book that it could mess up her teeth. Phoenix somehow scored some bitter but healthy juice. They figured they'd smear it on her hands so she'd stop shoving them in her mouth. Phoenix heard it was training time and bailed on them. Larian just calmly waved goodbye and stayed put with Perian. He gave his brother props in his head for thinking of everything. Still, he wiped the juice off her little hands anyway. He'd heard that kids feel safe at this age when they suck on their hands. He smiled, realizing he didn't want to take away even a tiny bit of her peace. Larian knew she'd understand how the world saw her when she grew up. That's exactly why he wanted to protect her. At least for now. He wanted her to grow up without ever knowing disappointment. Even back then, he knew there'd be a time when he couldn't protect her. Larian didn't even realize it, but thinking about it, tears started streaming down his face. He noticed they were mixed with bright red blood again. That made him remember the 3 days he spent in the tower with what was left of her. Seeing that, he sobbed so hard and for so long that his tear ducts basically gave out. Ever since then, he hasn't been able to cry normal tears. Now only rivers of blood flow from his eyes. Still, he knew it was nothing compared to what Perian went through. He lived knowing his sister had already died a miserable death in that tower a long time ago. He was the only one who knew about her death, and it stirred up a storm of emotions inside him. He refused to believe someone else could have Perian's face and be living a better life. He wished every kid who looked like Perian would just drop dead. Larian figured that was the only way he'd ever be able to forget her. All these years, he couldn't stop replaying those happy memories with her. Meanwhile, the one responsible for all the suffering was already in the Holy Kingdom. Like a true spy, she'd managed to completely change her appearance. It took her longer to get back, because she'd poured all her energy into Roxar. She used to be able to teleport without getting drained. But things were different now. She realized her powers were finally starting to go haywire. This whole thing goes back to when she was just a babe in the Emperor's crib. She was stoked that she'd managed to pull off everything she'd planned. Perian was proud that the princess hadn't let her down, and had even blown past all expectations. That night, she figured all that was left was to lift the ban on Hauntain. Then, out of nowhere, she picked up this weird foreign energy. Up until then, there hadn't been anything in this castle worth a second glance. She decided to head towards the energy and stopped just short of the guards. The girl realized they were just guarding the sword, like any patrol would. Perian took a good hard look at the Emperor's legendary blade. Alao didn't pull it out because she proved she deserved to rule. He used to be sealed away by magic, until Perry broke the seal. Now, for the first time, she felt this weird energy radiating from him. She figured breaking the seal must be what's starting to wake up his suppressed power. The guards kept her from getting closer, so she decided to get sneaky. She managed to create a space underground and teleport herself there. She ended up right where the tip of the sword was sticking out. Perian still couldn't figure out why she was sensing this energy. The girl decided to move on to the next step and touch it. The second she did, her whole body got surrounded by light. The feeling was just like when the artifact's energy entered her body. She couldn't figure out why it was consuming her again. Perian froze, stunned as a crazy thought popped into her head. She decided to check it out back in the kingdom and hauled ass back there. That's why Perian faked her own death so damn quick. The second she crossed the border, she beelined straight for her place. Mello heard her story and finally understood why she'd been gone so long. He asked, surprised, if her powers had really gotten that weak. Perian started glowing again and said she'd fill him in on the details later. She dropped the disguise and asked if Roxor's interrogation was over. Mello grumbled that they got nothing from him but a bunch of crazy talk. He felt bad she was trying so hard, and they still weren't getting results. He told her not to push herself too hard and just go get some rest. After that, Perian actually followed his order and went to her room. Despite everything she'd said, she thought the investigation was more important than resting. She realized her hunch could turn out to be a real can of worms. The girl thought again about the artifact she'd taken from the fake Perian. As soon as she compared it to the sword, she was able to find a lead. Both the shield and the sword were related to the 3 sacred treasures that appeared in the holy texts. They always had a status that set them apart from similar legends. Because of that, she had a guess about what the 3rd treasure might be. She envisioned a divine sculpture, made in the image of a god. The scripture said miracles could happen around it. Perian figured her ability to create bodies fit the description of a miracle. She felt weird thinking she was special, but she'd always found it strange. She wasn't just making dolls, but bodies identical to humans. That's how she explained why both the sword and the shield reacted to her. She decided to test this copy by going to her original body. All this time, she'd been using copies for her operations. The girl placed her hand on the door, separating her from the secret chamber. Her original body was kept in a place no one could ever access. Only Perian copies with a consciousness could visit this place. She analyzed the body's appearance and found no changes whatsoever. The girl handled the body carefully, a body that had never died. She lifted it, knowing she could vanish if anything happened to it. Perian didn't notice any changes and figured she might have been wrong. She kept thinking about it until her main body started to fall apart. Perian couldn't believe it was disappearing, like it was the copy. She knew a human body couldn't just dissolve into the ground like that. Perian felt a jolt of fear and wondered if she was even alive anymore.